I shield high net worth assets from predatory relatives for a living. My name is Letizia Morris. I am a corporate trust officer for a premier wealth management bank in Scottsdale, Arizona. I spend my days executing blind trusts, untangling complex estate transfers, and watching heirs tear each other apart over generational wealth. I know exactly how money and leverage move the second a heart stops beating. My husband Michael went for his usual Saturday morning cycling route through the McDowell Sonoran Preserve. He was 34 years old. A distracted driver drifted into the designated bike lane. The hospital physician pronounced him dead at 10:14 that morning. On Tuesday afternoon, I pulled my car into our driveway. The desert sun baked the asphalt, radiating heat through the thin soles of my shoes. I held a clear plastic hospital bag containing his shattered helmet and a manila folder filled with sterile, numb discharge paperwork. My neighbor Carol walked across the property line. She held a foil-covered baking dish in her hands. Carol offered her soft, rehearsed condolences. She handed me the warm dish. Then she told me she would see me at the memorial service tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. I stopped walking. The plastic handles of the hospital bag dug sharp ridges into my palm. I kept my voice flat and asked Carol what service she meant. Carol looked at me with genuine confusion. She shifted the foil dish into her other hand and pulled a heavy cardstock program from her purse. She handed it to me. The paper was expensive and thick. It listed the name of an upscale local funeral home. It detailed the timeline, the floral arrangements, and the scheduled speakers. My mother-in-law, Barbara, had hijacked the body transport from the county morgue. She planned an elaborate memorial service for my husband. She chose a mahogany casket. She invited the neighborhood. She did not notify the widow. I scanned the text on the heavy cardstock. My name did not appear anywhere on the printed program. Welcome back to Vega Vengeance, where blood is thick, but bank statements are thicker. If your in-laws have ever treated your marriage like a temporary inconvenience, you will understand this story. Drop your age in the comments, hit subscribe, and tell me if you have ever had to fight against your own erasure. Because what I did when I arrived at that funeral home shocked every single person in the room. I did not drop the hospital paperwork onto the hot concrete. I did not fall to my knees and scream at the cloudless Arizona sky. Grief requires a safe, secure environment to unravel, and I realized in that exact moment I was no longer safe. I handed the printed program back to Carol. I thanked her for the casserole. I walked inside my empty house and locked the deadbolt. The air conditioning kicked on, blowing cold air across my shoulders. I set the plastic bag on the kitchen island. I did not dial Barbara's phone number to demand an explanation. Noise is the enemy of accuracy. I felt a cold, clinical focus settle over my vision, taking the place of the shock. Barbara believed she could erase my marital identity by simply leaving my name off a piece of paper. She assumed the grieving widow would stay home and weep while the family controlled the narrative. She forgot my profession. I reached into my work tote and pulled out a notarized legal document. I had a funeral home to visit. The drive from my quiet neighborhood to the upscale funeral home took 22 minutes. I navigated the wide, sun-baked avenues of Scottsdale with the air conditioning running on its highest setting. The Arizona heat radiated off the asphalt, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage. My hands rested lightly on the leather steering wheel. I did not speed. I did not run any yellow lights. Rushing implies panic, and I possessed no reason to panic. I possessed the documentation. During the drive, I considered the specific mechanics of the family I had married into. Michael was the eldest of 3 siblings. He was a brilliant software architect who built his wealth through disciplined investments and relentless 70-hour work weeks. His mother, Barbara, viewed his success not as an individual achievement, but as a communal family dividend. She operated under the unwavering assumption that her title as his mother granted her unrestricted access to his bank accounts. His younger sister Stephanie adopted the identical philosophy. Stephanie treated her brother like a limitless, revolving line of credit. She viewed standard employment as a temporary inconvenience between extended vacations. Whenever her boutique credit cards reached their limit or her car lease fell into arrears, she would arrive at our front door, offering a hollow apology and an outstretched hand. Michael had spent his 20s shielding them from the consequences of their own fiscal irresponsibility. When we married, I became the structural barrier that ended the infinite bailouts. I installed strict financial boundaries. I became the designated enemy. They never viewed me as a relative. They viewed me as an auditor who had seized control of their favorite asset. I turned onto Camelback Road and located the address printed on the heavy cardstock program. The funeral home resembled a luxury desert resort rather than a mortuary. The exterior featured imported sandstone pillars, towering date palms, and a tiered water fountain cascading into a turquoise reflection pool. Facilities of this caliber do not cater to simple grief. They cater to performative mourning. They extract maximum profit by convincing distressed families that the depth of their love is directly proportional to the amount of money they spend on the floral arrangements. I parked my sedan in a designated visitor slot. I gathered my work tote and stepped out into the dry, suffocating heat. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored black blazer. I walked up the manicured stone pathway toward the towering, polished brass double doors at the main entrance. Standing directly in front of those brass doors, blocking the primary threshold, was Stephanie. My sister-in-law wore a fitted, dark wrap dress and oversized designer sunglasses. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest, establishing a physical barricade. She had positioned herself outside specifically to intercept me. She knew Carol the neighbor would inevitably leak the details of the service. She was waiting to execute the social rejection in person. I approached the entrance. I stopped 3 feet away from her. The spray from the nearby water fountain misted faintly against my skin. "Letizia," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of any genuine sorrow. "You should not be here right now." I did not break eye contact. I looked at the dark lenses of her sunglasses. "I am here to attend the memorial service for my husband," I replied. My tone was level and analytical. Stephanie shifted her weight, planting her high heels firmly against the stone tiles. "Mom is handling the logistics today," she stated. "We rented the private viewing suite. We want to keep the environment calm and focused on his memory. This is a family matter." The phrase hung in the hot desert air. This is a family matter. She deployed the sentence as a weapon, designed to remind the grieving widow of her inherent outsider status. Stephanie expected me to fracture. She wanted me to raise my voice, cause a public scene on the manicured walkway, and provide her with the justification to call the facility's security team. She wanted to prove to everyone inside that I was the unstable, hostile woman Barbara always claimed I was. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue the semantics of family. Arguing with a parasite only validates their presence. I noticed a man standing just inside the glass foyer, watching the interaction through the transparent pane. He wore a pristine dark suit and a silver name tag. He was the funeral director managing the afternoon events. I bypassed Stephanie entirely. I stepped to the right, forcing her to pivot awkwardly to maintain her blockade. I opened the heavy brass door and walked into the air-conditioned lobby. Stephanie followed me, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You need to leave," she hissed, reaching out to grab my elbow. I stepped out of her reach and approached the man in the dark suit. I reached into my leather work tote. I bypassed the standard identification cards and retrieved a crisp legal document encased in a protective plastic sleeve. I slid the document across the polished reception counter. Under the Arizona Revised Statutes, a specific hierarchy dictates who holds the legal authority to control the disposition of human remains. The funeral director knew this law intimately. It governed his entire profession. "That is a notarized spousal right of disposition," I informed the director. My voice carried the rhythmic cadence of a corporate officer executing a standard transfer. It designates me as the sole legal authority governing the remains, the memorial arrangements, and the final resting place of Michael Morris. The funeral director looked at the embossed seal. He read the primary clauses. He understood the gravity of the paperwork sitting on his counter. A facility that proceeds with burial services against the explicit, documented wishes of the legal spouse exposes their corporate entity to staggering civil liability lawsuits. Stephanie stepped up to the counter, her face flushed with sudden indignation. "My mother signed the service contract yesterday," she argued, pointing a manicured finger at the director. "She paid for the viewing suite." The funeral director did not look at Stephanie. He looked at me. He recognized the hierarchy of power in the room. Contracts signed by unauthorized third parties hold zero legal weight when the primary statutory authority is present in the building. He folded his hands in front of his waist and offered a deep, respectful nod. "My apologies, Mrs. Morris," he said, his tone shifting into immediate deferential compliance. "Please let me escort you to the primary viewing room." He stepped out from behind the counter and gestured down the carpeted hallway. Stephanie stood frozen in the lobby, her mouth slightly open. The social blockade she had constructed shattered upon impact with empirical statutory law. The family matter was officially a legal matter, and she possessed zero jurisdiction. I walked down the quiet, dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of expensive floor wax and the heavy, cloying scent of white lilies. The director opened a set of carved wooden doors leading into the main suite. The room was vast and softly illuminated by recessed lighting. Rows of padded velvet chairs faced the front staging area. I stopped just inside the doorway and surveyed the environment my mother-in-law had engineered. Resting in the center of the room, surrounded by cascading towers of imported white orchids, was the casket. It was constructed of deep red Honduran mahogany, featuring polished bronze handles and a tufted silk interior. I evaluate asset values for a living. I recognized the manufacturer. I knew the retail pricing tiers. That specific mahogany model cost no less than $30,000. I walked toward the front row of chairs. Resting on the velvet cushions were stacks of the heavy cardstock memorial programs. I picked one up. I opened the thick textured paper. The text was printed in elegant gold typography. It featured a timeline of Michael's life, highlighting his professional achievements and his early academic accolades. I scanned the paragraph dedicated to his surviving relatives. Michael Morris, it read, cherished son of Barbara, beloved brother of Jason and Stephanie. My name was absent. The omission was not a clerical oversight. It was a precise, calculated architectural decision. Barbara had designed this entire event to rewrite history. She wanted to present a sanitized version of her son's life, where his independence never occurred, where his marriage never existed, and where his assets remained firmly under her maternal control. She was utilizing the funeral as a public relations campaign to erase my marital identity. I set the program back down on the velvet chair. The paper felt heavy against the fabric. I looked at the imported white orchids. I looked at the polished bronze handles on the mahogany casket. The pristine aesthetics of the room began to unravel in my mind, replaced by the cold, rigid structure of a mathematical equation. Funerals of this caliber do not operate on credit. Upscale mortuaries demand upfront capital before they secure the flowers, print the cardstock, or release the body for a viewing. They require a wire transfer or a certified cashier check. My mother-in-law lived on a fixed monthly pension. She rented a modest condominium. Her entire financial strategy relied on extracting subsidies from her eldest son. She did not possess $30,000 in liquid cash to purchase Honduran mahogany. Michael and I maintained a joint checking account at a Tier 1 commercial bank to cover our shared household expenses. We kept the balance robust to ensure our automated mortgage payments and utility drafts cleared without interruption. The funeral director required immediate payment yesterday afternoon. Barbara signed the contract yesterday afternoon. The chill of the air conditioning unit faded into the background. A different kind of cold settled over my thoughts. The social slight of a missing name on a printed program was merely a distraction. It was a theatrical performance designed to keep me occupied, while the actual crime occurred in the shadows. If Barbara paid for the casket, she used stolen capital. I turned away from the floral arrangements and walked out of the viewing room. I needed to access a secure internet connection. I needed to open my banking ledger and look at the withdrawal history. The mourning period was over. The forensic audit had begun. I parked my sedan inside the attached garage of our Scottsdale home. The heavy insulated door descended with a steady mechanical rattle, sealing out the relentless desert heat. The transition from the blinding Arizona sun to the cool, shadowed interior of the house felt jarring. The ambient temperature was regulated to a precise 70 degrees, but the air inside felt hollow. Grief is a tangible physical weight. It sits at the base of your throat and presses downward against your lungs. A normal widow might have collapsed onto the entryway bench. She might have wept into the fabric of her husband's discarded jacket hanging on the hall rack. I did not possess the luxury of weeping. The interaction at the funeral home had activated a different biological response. The sterile clinical instincts of a corporate trust officer superseded the emotional trauma of a grieving spouse. I placed my leather work tote on the kitchen island. I bypassed the living room and walked directly down the hallway to my home office. The space functioned as my secondary command center. It featured a wide ergonomic desk, dual high-definition monitors, and a secure encrypted router. I sat in my chair and woke the computer from its dormant state. When a spouse dies, the immediate aftermath is buried in administrative bureaucracy. The municipal government requires certified copies of the death certificate to process insurance claims, transfer vehicle titles, and close individual utility accounts. The county charges a specific fee for each certified copy. I needed to initiate that request. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the online portal for our Tier 1 commercial bank. Michael and I maintained a joint checking account. We utilized this specific ledger to manage our shared household overhead. The mortgage drafts, the property taxes, the automated grocery deliveries all originated from this single pool of liquid capital. We kept the balance robust to ensure our financial architecture remained unshakable. I typed my alphanumeric credentials into the login fields. The banking interface loaded, displaying our personal dashboard in crisp blue and white typography. I looked at the primary balance. My fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. I know the exact metric of my own finances. I review our domestic ledger every Friday afternoon. The number staring back at me from the high-resolution monitor was anemic. It was wrong. A staggering deficit had hollowed out the account. I clicked the hyperlink to expand the transaction history. The ledger populated with a chronological list of recent activity. At the very top of the screen, sitting above the pending utility drafts, was a cleared wire transfer. The deduction was exactly $45,000. I shifted my gaze to the timestamp associated with the transaction. The digital ink read, Saturday morning at 11:58. The physician at the trauma center had pronounced my husband dead at 10:14 that same morning. 1 hour and 44 minutes. Michael was still resting in a sterile hospital bay. His shattered cycling helmet was still sitting in a plastic evidence bag. I was still sitting in a hard plastic chair in the family waiting room, staring blankly at a tiled wall. While I was suffocating under the sudden collapse of my reality, someone else was initiating a high-tier wire transfer to strip mine our shared assets. The proximity of the death to the theft was breathtaking. It required a predatory speed that defied standard human mourning. I clicked on the specific transaction line to reveal the routing details. The digital receipt expanded. The destination of the $45,000 wire was a local credit union located just outside the Scottsdale city limits. It was the exact financial institution utilized by my mother-in-law. Barbara had not simply signed a contract for a mahogany casket on credit. She had raided my joint checking account to fund her theatrical production. Commercial banks deploy rigorous security protocols to prevent unauthorized digital withdrawals. A third party cannot simply call a toll-free number and request a 5-figure wire transfer without triggering an immediate fraud lockdown. They require authentication. They require legal authorization. I pulled up the clearinghouse attachment linked to the wire. The bank teller who processed the request had uploaded a digitized copy of the authorizing document. It was a formal power of attorney. I stared at the scanned page and searched my mental archive. The document was dated 10 years ago. It was drafted and notarized long before Michael and I ever met. During his early 20s, my husband had taken an extended backpacking trip across Europe. To ensure his domestic bills were paid during his absence, he had granted his mother a broad financial power of attorney. When he returned from Europe, he simply resumed control of his accounts. He never filed the formal legal paperwork to revoke her access. The document lay dormant. Barbara had kept that signed piece of paper folded inside a drawer for an entire decade, waiting for a lucrative opportunity. She walked into a bank branch on Saturday morning, presented the stale document, and drained $45,000 from her deceased son's ledger. Her action constituted a fundamental violation of statutory banking law. A power of attorney is not a perpetual license. It instantly expires the exact second the principal individual becomes incapacitated or dies. The legal authority vanishes upon the last heartbeat. Utilizing a defunct authorization document post-mortem to access a joint account is a direct, unmitigated act of bank fraud. I leaned back against the mesh fabric of my office chair. I analyzed the mathematics of her crime. The lavish memorial service she had engineered at the upscale mortuary, the imported white orchids, the velvet viewing chairs, the Honduran mahogany casket totaled roughly $30,000. Barbara had extracted $45,000. A $15,000 surplus remained unaccounted for. People do not steal extra capital by accident. They steal the exact amount they require to solve their impending crises. To understand the missing $15,000, you have to understand the parasitic ecosystem of my in-laws. The answer was Jason. Jason was Michael's younger brother. He was 31 years old and functioned as the chaotic golden child of the family. While Michael spent his adult life building software architecture and accumulating stable wealth, Jason treated reality as a casino. He refused to hold traditional employment. He preferred the rapid dopamine cycles of offshore sports betting platforms and local underground poker tables. Jason lived in a perpetual state of manufactured emergency. Whenever his gambling debts reached a critical threshold, he would arrive at his mother's condominium offering a hollow apology and an outstretched palm. Barbara viewed Jason's chronic failures not as a character flaw, but as a vulnerability that required her constant maternal protection. She subsidized his chaos using Michael's stability. The $15,000 surplus was not a clerical error. It was a targeted bailout. Jason's creditors do not operate with the patience of traditional lending institutions. They demand immediate liquid cash. Barbara treated the tragic sudden death of her eldest son as a lucrative liquidity event. She bypassed the mourning process entirely. She used $30,000 to build a pristine public stage where she could perform her grief for the neighborhood. She routed the remaining $15,000 directly to Jason to satisfy his violent debts. She used a corpse to pay a bookie. The realization shifted the entire paradigm of the afternoon. The missing name on the heavy cardstock funeral program was merely a social smokescreen. The physical blockade at the brass doors of the mortuary was a tactical distraction. My sister-in-law, Stephanie, had attempted to keep me out of the viewing room to prevent me from assessing the financial cost of the floral arrangements. They wanted to keep the widow blind while the ink dried on the wire transfer. I placed my hands flat on the smooth surface of my desk. The chill from the air conditioning vent blew steadily against my neck. This was no longer a domestic dispute over memorial logistics. It was a state-level felony. The woman who brought me a foil-covered casserole dish had committed grand theft wire fraud and identity manipulation. My pulse maintained a slow, deliberate rhythm. If Barbara possessed the sheer audacity to breach a Tier 1 commercial bank using a decade-old defunct legal document, her greed would not stop at the checking account. A parasite does not stop feeding until the host is entirely dry. There was a much larger asset in play. Michael possessed a corporate executive life insurance policy through his software firm. The death benefit was substantial. I minimized the banking portal. I opened a new browser tab and navigated toward the secure digital gateway for the life insurance provider. If my mother-in-law was willing to commit bank fraud for $45,000, I needed to know what she was willing to do for $750,000. I sat in the quiet isolation of my home office, listening to the steady hum of the central air conditioning unit. The blinding Arizona sunlight filtering through the horizontal window blinds began to fade, casting long, muted shadows across my dual monitors. The revelation of the $45,000 wire transfer hung in the sterile air of the room. My mother-in-law had bypassed the natural mourning process and proceeded directly to the liquidation phase of my husband's death. She utilized a stale 10-year-old pre-marriage power of attorney document to drain our joint checking account. She funded a lavish $30,000 mahogany casket to perform her grief for the neighborhood and funneled the remaining $15,000 surplus to cover the gambling debts of her younger son, Jason. A normal widow might have reached for her cellular phone. She might have dialed Barbara's number, demanded an explanation, and screamed into the receiver until her vocal cords frayed. I did not touch my phone. I am a corporate trust officer. I spend 40 hours a week shielding high-net-worth assets from predatory relatives and tracing the exact mechanics of generational theft. I understand that noise is the enemy of accuracy. Screaming at a thief only provides them with the tactical advantage of preparation. It allows them to construct a defensive narrative, hire legal counsel, and destroy the secondary evidence before the authorities arrive. I prefer the quiet, undeniable satisfaction of a documented trap. I initiated the grind. I opened a secure encrypted browser window. I bypassed the standard customer service portals and navigated directly to the commercial fraud division of my Tier 1 bank. I drafted a formal notification of unauthorized post-mortem withdrawal. I cited the specific routing sequence of the $45,000 wire transfer. I attached the municipal documentation from the trauma center proving the exact hour of my husband's passing. A power of attorney legally evaporates the very second the principal individual dies. Utilizing a defunct authorization document to extract liquid cash across state banking lines constitutes a severe statutory violation. I submitted the fraud report. The bank would receive the alert by Monday morning. Their security algorithms would instantly flag the transaction, freezing my mother-in-law's local credit union account, pending a formal federal review. With the liquid cash secured in a legal holding pattern, I turned my attention to the larger target. Predators who possess the audacity to breach a commercial checking account rarely stop feeding until the host is entirely dry. If Barbara was willing to commit bank fraud for $45,000, she would not hesitate to target the primary asset. Michael was a brilliant, meticulous software architect. He built his career on disciplined logic and structural redundancy. His firm provided a robust executive compensation package designed to protect our shared future. The cornerstone of that package was a corporate term life insurance policy featuring a death benefit of $750,000. We managed our financial architecture as a unified team, and I possessed the master administrative credentials to the provider portal. I opened a new tab and typed the web address for the life insurance gateway. I entered the alphanumeric sequence and bypassed the two-factor authentication prompt. The digital dashboard loaded, displaying his policy details in crisp, black typography. In corporate trust management, you learn very quickly that the most valuable information is rarely found on the summary page. The truth resides in the metadata. I clicked on the Security Settings tab and opened the raw administrative access logs. The server generated a chronological ledger detailing every digital interaction associated with his specific profile. A fresh entry sat at the very top of the list. Someone had logged into the digital portal earlier that same week. I leaned forward, the ergonomic mesh of my office chair pressed firmly against my spine. I stared at the timestamp recorded next to the login event. The digital ink read Saturday morning at 8:42. My pulse maintained a slow, deliberate rhythm as the reality of that specific hour crystallized in my mind. At 8:42 on Saturday morning, I was standing in a sterile, brightly lit trauma bay. The emergency medical technicians were performing aggressive chest compressions on my husband. The air smelled of iodine, metallic blood, and sheer panic. I was holding his cold hand while the cardiac monitor emitted a flat, continuous tone. The access log displayed the Internet Protocol address utilized for the login. It did not originate from Michael's mobile device or his office workstation. It traced back to a residential broadband network. I copied the numerical sequence and ran it through a basic geolocation tracking software. The provider node pinpointed a specific geographic quadrant in the neighboring suburb. It matched the exact location of Barbara's condominium. While her eldest son lay unconscious in an intensive care unit, fighting a losing battle against traumatic, blunt force injuries, Barbara was not pacing a hospital waiting room. She was not seeking comfort. She was sitting at her home computer, logging into his corporate benefits portal. I clicked on the session history to view the exact keystrokes of her digital invasion. The screen displayed a submitted electronic form. It was a formal request to modify the primary beneficiary designation. The original document listed my legal name, Letizia Morris, as the sole recipient of the funds. The submitted modification erased my identity entirely. The new primary beneficiary was typed clearly into the empty field, Jason Morris. Barbara attempted to reroute $750,000 away from the legal spouse and hand it directly to her chaotic golden child. Jason treated reality as a casino. He refused to hold traditional employment, preferring the rapid dopamine cycles of offshore sports betting platforms. His debts were structural and permanent. Barbara viewed Michael's tragic accident as the ultimate lottery payout. She assumed the sudden trauma of a fatal cycling collision would keep the grieving widow distracted for weeks. She believed she could alter the digital paperwork in the shadows and secure a lifetime of untethered wealth for her younger son before the insurance adjusters even processed the initial death certificate. Her greed was boundless, but her understanding of corporate security architecture was flawed. Modern financial institutions do not execute six-figure beneficiary modifications based on a simple web submission. They require physical, notarized signatures. They require identity verification. The digital request was currently sitting in a pending status, flagged by the system for secondary administrative review. I did not close the browser window. I initiated the printing sequence. The laser printer resting on my bookshelf whirred to life. The mechanical hum filled the silent office, providing a steady, rhythmic soundtrack to my investigation. I printed the raw access logs detailing the Saturday morning timestamp. I printed the residential Internet Protocol trace proving the connection originated from Barbara's address. I printed the pending modification request displaying the forged digital footprint and Jason's name. I stood up and gathered the warm sheets of paper from the output tray. I used a heavy-duty 3-hole punch to prepare the left margins. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved a sleek black leather portfolio. It was the specific binder I utilized for cases involving systemic identity theft and high-tier wire fraud. I placed the documents inside, snapping the silver metal rings securely into place. The situation had fundamentally evolved. This was no longer a petty family dispute over floral arrangements and missing names on a heavy cardstock program. My mother-in-law had crossed a permanent statutory threshold. Attempting to manipulate a corporate insurance policy across state lines using stolen credentials constitutes felony identity theft and federal wire fraud. I closed the black leather cover. The smooth, premium material felt cool beneath my palms. The forensic timeline was flawless. The evidence was secured, and the trap was meticulously documented. But a predator who fails to capture the primary target will inevitably return to scavenge whatever remains. I knew Barbara would eventually sense the pending status on the insurance portal and realize she needed a secondary method to extract the remaining equity from her son's life. She would need a public mechanism to monetize her grief. As I sat in the dimming light of my office, my cellular phone illuminated on the desk, displaying a new group text notification. The financial siege was shifting to a brand new stage. The ambient light in my home office had shifted from the harsh glare of the desert afternoon to a muted, dusky violet. I sat in my ergonomic chair, looking at the closed cover of the black leather portfolio resting on my desk. Inside those metal rings sat the definitive proof of state and federal crimes. My mother-in-law had breached a commercial bank and attempted to manipulate a corporate life insurance portal within hours of my husband's death. I believed I had mapped the outer boundaries of her greed. I underestimated her capacity for theater. My cellular phone illuminated on the smooth granite surface of my desk. A short vibration signaled an incoming notification. I picked up the device. The screen displayed a new message in a group thread containing Barbara, Stephanie, Jason, and myself. I unlocked the hardware and read the text. It was authored by Barbara. The tone was brisk and organizational, carrying the precise cadence of an event planner directing her subordinate staff. "Letizia, dear," the message began. "We are finalizing the aesthetic details for the reception tomorrow, following the burial. Please ensure you wear a muted navy or dark gray rather than strict black. We hired a professional photographer to capture the gathering, and solid black absorbs too much ambient light for the group portraits. We want a cohesive look to honor Michael properly." I read the paragraph a second time. My husband had been dead for less than 96 hours. His body was resting inside a temperature-controlled mortuary cooler. His mother was dictating my wardrobe palette because she was concerned about the lighting balance for a professional photography session. She was treating the grieving widow like a peripheral bridesmaid in a staged production. A secondary message arrived immediately after the first. It contained a hyperlink and a brief instruction. "Please share this digital flyer across your social channels tonight," Barbara wrote. "We want to ensure all of his colleagues see it before they arrive tomorrow." I tapped the blue link. The browser on my mobile device opened, routing me to a polished crowdfunding portal. The banner at the very top of the screen displayed a high-resolution photograph of Michael, smiling during a recent cycling trip through the McDowell Mountains. Beneath the image, bold typography announced the creation of the Michael Morris Memorial Fund. I forwarded the link to my secure desktop computer, requiring a larger monitor to scrutinize the digital architecture. The page loaded on my primary screen. The design was immaculate. It featured a professionally drafted narrative detailing my husband's passion for outdoor athletics and his brilliant tenure as a software architect. The text was engineered to extract maximum sympathy from anyone who visited the domain. The target audience was glaringly obvious. Michael worked in a sector defined by lucrative stock options and high-tier executive compensation. His professional network consisted of affluent technology developers, venture capitalists, and software engineers. Barbara knew these individuals possessed deep reserves of disposable income. She also knew they would feel a profound social obligation to contribute to a memorial cause, to assuage their own grief. The stated goal of the campaign was $100,000. According to the campaign description, all proceeds would be utilized to establish a local charity dedicated to urban bicycle safety and infrastructure advocacy in Michael's name. It sounded noble. It sounded perfect. It also lacked a very specific piece of statutory documentation. When a legitimate nonprofit organization solicits public donations, they are legally required to display their federal tax-exempt identification number. A registered charity must provide transparency regarding their operational structure so donors can claim their tax deductions. I scrolled to the very bottom of the webpage, searching the fine print in the footer. There was no federal employer identification number. There was no mention of a board of directors. There was only a generic payment processing gateway linked to an external routing number. I opened a new tab and navigated to the Arizona Corporation Commission public database. Every legitimate business and charitable trust operating within the state boundaries must file articles of incorporation. I typed the exact name of the memorial fund into the search registry. The system processed the query and generated a single matching result. I clicked the highlighted text to view the organizational filing. The Michael Morris Memorial Fund was not registered as a charitable entity. It possessed no tax-exempt status. It was categorized as a standard domestic limited liability company. I checked the date of formation. The articles were filed electronically on Monday morning. That was exactly 1 day before my neighbor Carol walked across the driveway to hand me a foil-wrapped casserole and inform me about the funeral arrangements. I shifted my gaze to the registered agent section. The state requires every limited liability company to name a specific individual who controls the enterprise and assumes legal responsibility. The name, printed in crisp digital ink, was Jason Morris. I placed my hands flat against the edge of my desk. The chill of the air conditioning vent blew steadily across the back of my neck. The entire geometry of the afternoon funeral blockade finally locked into a cohesive, terrifying shape. The $30,000 mahogany casket and the imported white orchids were not merely expressions of maternal grief. They were capital expenditures. Barbara and Jason had utilized my stolen checking account funds to build a premium stage. They needed the memorial service to project an aura of established wealth, so Michael's affluent Silicon Valley colleagues would feel confident opening their checkbooks. They hired a professional photographer to document the attendance of these tech executives, creating marketing material for future solicitations. They were hosting a networking gala disguised as a burial. They were actively monetizing my husband's corpse to subsidize the golden child. Every single dollar donated by those grieving software developers would bypass any charitable endeavor. The funds would flow through the online payment gateway directly into a private corporate bank account controlled exclusively by Jason. He would use the memorial contributions to satisfy his underground gambling debts and fund his chaotic lifestyle shielded by a corporate veil. The sheer calculation of the scheme was staggering. They were treating the sudden, fatal trauma of a 34-year-old man as a lucrative startup venture. I initiated the printing sequence. The laser machine hummed to life, breaking the silence of my office. I printed the crowdfunding landing page, capturing the photograph and the deceptive charitable claims. I printed the Arizona corporate registry filing, proving the entity was a private commercial company owned by my brother-in-law. I gathered the warm sheets of paper from the output tray. I punched 3 holes along the left margin. I opened the black leather portfolio and secured the fresh documentation behind the forged life insurance access logs. The binder was growing heavier. The evidence now encompassed unauthorized post-mortem bank withdrawals, attempted insurance manipulation, and federal wire fraud via deceptive online solicitation. My in-laws were constructing a permanent prison cell and happily locking themselves inside. I closed the portfolio and smoothed my hand over the dark, textured leather. I had the mechanics of their financial crimes perfectly isolated. I was prepared to let them host their grim fundraising event tomorrow afternoon, knowing I possessed the paperwork to dismantle their entire operation before they could spend a single donated dollar. But parasites do not only target liquid assets. When cash is secured, they immediately pivot toward shelter. As I reached to turn off my desk lamp, my cellular phone vibrated a second time. This notification was not a group message. It was a direct, individual text from my sister-in-law, Stephanie. The message contained a scanned document attachment and a single line of text that carried a threat far more dangerous than a missing name on a funeral program. The glow from my computer monitors provided the only illumination inside my home office. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the corporate registry filing that exposed my brother-in-law as the sole owner of a fabricated charitable fund. The desert wind rattled the window panes, casting a dry, rhythmic sound against the glass. I had just documented a sprawling financial conspiracy designed to monetize my husband's death. The black leather portfolio resting on my desk contained undeniable proof of bank fraud and deceptive online solicitation. I assumed I had mapped the deepest trenches of their greed. Then the screen of my mobile device illuminated a second time. The notification badge indicated a direct message from my sister-in-law, Stephanie. She did not utilize the group thread her mother had created. She sought a private channel to deliver her specific brand of hostility. I picked up the phone. The glass felt cold against my palm. I unlocked the hardware and opened the text. The message contained a single PDF attachment, followed by a dense block of text. The wording was draped in a thin, synthetic layer of suburban sympathy. Stephanie possessed a unique talent for weaponizing polite language to execute ruthless demands. "Letizia, I know you are overwhelmed right now," she wrote. "We are all just trying to navigate this terrible loss. Mom is barely holding herself together. Michael was her firstborn, and she needs to feel connected to him. We were going through his old files today to gather photos for the memorial program, and we found some important paperwork regarding the Scottsdale house." I paused my reading. My pulse maintained a steady, deliberate cadence. When a parasite mentions physical property, the conversation has officially shifted from liquid cash to permanent shelter. "Jason has been sleeping on Mom's sofa since his apartment lease ended," Stephanie continued. "It is causing a lot of stress for everyone. Since the house was always meant to stay within the bloodline, Mom thinks it makes the most logical sense for Jason to relocate there after the dust settles. We want to give you plenty of time to find a new apartment. 30 days should be enough for you to clear out your personal belongings. We can discuss the logistics tomorrow after the reception." She did not ask a question. She issued an eviction notice. She delivered it less than 96 hours after a trauma physician pronounced my husband dead. Michael had not even been buried yet. His mother and his sister were already drafting the timeline to physically remove his widow from her primary residence. I tapped the PDF attachment. The document loaded on my high-resolution screen. It was a scanned copy of a single-page legal instrument. The paper appeared yellowed and degraded, indicating it had spent over a decade sitting inside a humid filing cabinet. The bold, black typography at the top of the page identified the document as a quitclaim deed. "I am a corporate trust officer. I examine property transfers and estate conveyances every single day. I did not need to consult a real estate attorney to decipher the text. A quitclaim deed is the weakest form of property transfer recognized under the law. It contains 0 warranties of title. It simply states that the grantor is signing over whatever current interest they might possess to the grantee at that exact second." I scanned the relevant data fields. The grantor was listed as Michael Morris. The grantee was listed as Barbara Morris. I looked at the date stamped next to the signature line. The ink placed the execution of the document exactly 12 years ago. The chronological history of the asset locked into place. Michael purchased this Scottsdale property when he was 22 years old. He was a young software developer, securing his first piece of permanent equity. At that age, he was still deeply entangled in his mother's financial web. Barbara likely viewed his independent purchase as a threat to her control over his resources. I could easily imagine the psychological manipulation she deployed. She probably sat at his kitchen counter, weeping about her own financial insecurity. She likely convinced him to sign a blank quitclaim deed under the guise of protecting the family legacy, just in case something tragic ever happened to him. She manipulated a young man into providing her with a theoretical safety net. Michael signed the paper to appease her. He handed it over and promptly forgot it ever existed. He never recorded the instrument with the county clerk. Barbara took that unrecorded deed, placed it inside a manila folder, and guarded it for 12 years. She treated it like a dormant lottery ticket, waiting for the optimal moment to cash it in. The optimal moment arrived when a distracted driver drifted into a designated bike lane. My mother-in-law had already drained $45,000 from our joint checking account. She had attempted to reroute $750,000 from his corporate life insurance policy. She was currently utilizing a fake memorial fund to solicit untaxed capital from his affluent colleagues. But liquid assets can be spent and squandered. Real estate provides permanent structural security. Jason was unemployable. He was drowning in offshore gambling debts. He possessed zero capacity to secure a mortgage or pass a standard tenant background check. Barbara needed a permanent solution for her chaotic golden child. She looked at the house I shared with my husband. She looked at the walls we painted and the hardwood floors we restored together. She decided my sanctuary was the perfect subsidized housing solution for her younger son. The audacity of the scheme was staggering. They intended to walk into the Maricopa County Recorder's office tomorrow morning and file a 12-year-old dusty document. Filing an outdated, unrecorded deed against a married couple's primary residence does not automatically transfer ownership, but it creates a catastrophic legal hazard. It places a dark, heavy cloud on the title. A clouded title freezes the asset. It alerts the primary mortgage lender that a severe ownership dispute is underway. Commercial lenders despise unresolved title disputes. The bank holding our mortgage could use that recorded quitclaim to declare a default. They could freeze my ability to make the monthly payments. They could initiate foreclosure proceedings to protect their own collateral, while the family fought in civil court. Barbara and Stephanie did not care if they destroyed my credit in the process. They did not care if they dragged the estate into years of bitter, expensive probate litigation. They were betting that the sheer financial terror of an impending eviction would force me to surrender. They expected the grieving widow to collapse under the pressure, pack her belongings into cardboard boxes, and hand the keys to Jason just to escape the nightmare. I lowered my mobile device. I placed it gently onto the surface of my desk. The ambient temperature of the room felt icy against my skin, but my mind operated with a sharp, burning clarity. The parameters of the conflict had fundamentally shifted. This was no longer an investigation into stolen cash or deceptive online fundraising. This was a war for my physical survival. My in-laws were actively attempting to render me homeless. They wanted to erase my footprint from the property and discard me like a piece of broken furniture. A normal person might have panicked. A standard homeowner might have frantically dialed a real estate lawyer, begging for an emergency consultation. A terrified widow might have texted Stephanie back, pleading for extra time, or attempting to reason with their twisted morality. I did not text Stephanie back. I did not shed a single tear over the cruelty of their timeline. Morality is irrelevant when fighting apex predators. Pleading with a parasite only proves that you are a viable host. I turned my chair away from the mobile device and faced my dual monitors. I closed the tab displaying the fraudulent charitable fund. I needed to shift my focus from their offensive strategy to my own structural defenses. Barbara believed she held the ultimate trump card. She believed a faded piece of paper signed by a naive 22-year-old boy superseded the rights of a legal spouse. She assumed my husband and I had lived our entire marriage without ever updating our financial architecture. She assumed I was as careless with documentation as her own children were. She made a fatal miscalculation. She forgot that I spend 40 hours a week building impenetrable legal fortresses for high net worth clients. 3 months ago, Michael and I sat in this exact office and executed a comprehensive estate planning protocol. We did not leave our assets exposed to the unpredictable whims of probate court or the lingering ghosts of his past. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my local hard drive. I bypassed the standard passwords and utilized a secondary biometric authentication prompt. I needed to retrieve the specific legal instrument that rendered Barbara's 12-year-old quitclaim deed entirely worthless. I needed to print the paperwork that would turn their impending eviction attempt into a humiliating public defeat. The biometric scanner on my external hard drive required a thumbprint to disengage the encryption lock. I pressed my digit against the small glass square. A faint green light illuminated, confirming my identity and granting access to the secured digital vault. The folders populated on my secondary monitor, displaying years of meticulous financial architecture. My sister-in-law Stephanie believed she held a devastating trump card. She believed a yellowed piece of paper signed 12 years ago gave her the authority to dictate my living arrangements. She assumed the sudden trauma of Michael's death had rendered me helpless and disoriented. She expected the grieving widow to panic at the sight of an eviction threat, pack her belongings into cardboard boxes, and surrender the property to Jason. She made a fatal miscalculation. She confused silence with vulnerability. I did not reply to her threatening text message. I did not contact a real estate litigator to beg for an emergency consultation. I simply moved my cursor across the screen and opened the file labeled Morris Family Irrevocable Trust. In the realm of wealth management, an irrevocable trust is the ultimate defensive fortress. It is a distinct legal entity designed to separate individual ownership from the actual assets. Once a piece of property or a financial portfolio is transferred into this specific type of trust, the original owner relinquishes their direct claim. The trust becomes the supreme authority. The assets are permanently shielded from probate courts, predatory creditors, and grasping relatives. They cannot be seized, altered, or redirected without the explicit statutory consent of the designated trustee. 3 months ago, Michael and I sat in this exact home office to execute our comprehensive estate planning protocol. The Arizona sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue across the room. Michael was drinking black coffee and reviewing the thick stack of documents I had drafted. He was a brilliant software architect, but he found legal terminology tedious. He trusted my expertise implicitly. I explained the mechanics of the trust to him that evening. I told him we needed to build an impenetrable wall around our shared future. I did not explicitly state that the wall was designed to keep his mother and his siblings out. He loved his family, despite their chronic parasitic tendencies, and I never forced him to confront the sheer depth of their greed. I simply framed the restructure as a standard procedure for high net worth couples. He smiled, signed his name on the designated lines, and handed the pen back to me. We quietly transferred the deed to our Scottsdale home into the blind trust. We transferred his corporate life insurance policy. We transferred our primary investment portfolios. The moment the county clerk recorded the new deed 3 months ago, the Arizona house ceased to belong to Michael Morris, the individual. It became the exclusive property of the trust. I stared at the pristine, digitized documents on my monitor. The mathematical reality of my in-laws' offensive strategy was almost comical. Stephanie had texted me a scanned copy of a 12-year-old unrecorded quitclaim deed listing my husband as the grantor and Barbara as the grantee. A quitclaim deed only transfers whatever interest the grantor possesses at that exact second. Michael possessed 0 interest in the Scottsdale property when he died. He could not grant a house he did not legally own. The faded document sitting in my mother-in-law's humid filing cabinet was nothing more than a worthless historical artifact. It held 0 statutory weight. If Barbara attempted to file that archaic paper at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office tomorrow morning, the municipal clerk would reject it instantly. The in-laws were threatening to evict me from a sanctuary they had mathematically lost 90 days ago. They were fighting a war that was already over. The protective shadow of the trust extended far beyond the physical real estate. It neutralized every single vector of their attack. I thought about the digital access logs I had printed earlier, depicting Barbara's Saturday morning invasion of the life insurance portal. She had logged into the system from her residential broadband network and typed Jason's name into the primary beneficiary field, hoping to steal $750,000. Her forged digital footprint was entirely useless. When Michael and I executed the estate restructure, we submitted the formal paperwork to the corporate insurance provider, updating the policy ownership. The legal beneficiary of the $750,000 payout was not a person. The beneficiary was the Morris Family Irrevocable Trust. A civilian cannot simply log into a web portal and overwrite a certified trust designation using a basic online form. The corporate legal department would automatically reject the pending modification. Barbara had committed federal wire fraud and felony identity theft for a payout she possessed zero capacity to actually collect. I am the sole surviving trustee. I hold absolute, untouchable authority over every asset secured within the vault. The house, the investments, the insurance capital, all belong to my jurisdiction. I initiated the printing sequence. The heavy-duty laser machine resting on my bookshelf whirred to life, cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the room. The mechanical hum provided a steady, rhythmic soundtrack to my vindication. I watched the crisp white pages emerge from the output tray. The thick paper carried the certified seals and the notarized signatures proving the existence of the trust. I gathered the warm sheets, aligning the edges with practiced precision. I utilized my 3-hole punch to prepare the left margins. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved the sleek black leather portfolio. The silver metal rings clicked sharply as I pulled them apart. The binder was growing heavy. I placed the trust documents behind the evidence of the fraudulent megachurch crowdfunding campaign, the forged life insurance access logs, and the unauthorized bank withdrawal records. I snapped the rings closed, securing the flawless architecture of their impending destruction. I ran my hand across the smooth, dark leather cover. My physical shelter was safe. My long-term financial security was locked behind an impenetrable legal barrier. My mother-in-law could serve store-bought casseroles and send eviction threats until her vocal cords frayed, but she could not touch the foundation of my life. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The immediate relief of my structural safety allowed my mind to process a lingering discrepancy. The trust insulated the real estate and the corporate insurance policy, but it did not cover the joint checking account Michael and I utilized for our daily domestic overhead. That specific ledger remained outside the vault to facilitate automated utility drafts and municipal payments. That vulnerability was the exact breach point Barbara had exploited. She had drained $45,000 from that account, using a decade-old defunct power of attorney. The initial theft still required a forensic explanation. Commercial banking institutions deploy rigorous security algorithms to prevent unauthorized high-tier withdrawals. A bank teller does not simply hand over $45,000 in liquid cash to an elderly woman presenting a stale, unverified piece of paper. The teller would have escalated the transaction to the branch manager. The manager would have demanded secondary legal verification, especially considering the principal account holder was currently incapacitated in a trauma ward. Barbara could not have executed that wire transfer alone. She lacked the sophisticated legal vocabulary required to override a reluctant bank manager. She needed a professional accomplice to vouch for the legitimacy of the defunct authorization document. She needed someone wearing a tailored suit who possessed a state bar license to intimidate the financial institution into releasing the funds. The realization crystallized in my mind with cold, terrifying clarity. My mother-in-law had not acted as a solitary predator. She brought a specialized weapon to the bank on Saturday morning. I knew the exact identity of the man who facilitated the theft. He was the same man who had handled the minor traffic citations and the chaotic civil disputes for Jason over the past 5 years. He was the family estate attorney. I turned my attention back to my keyboard. The forensic investigation was expanding. I needed to schedule a meeting with a man who thought he was untouchable because he held a law degree. I needed to walk into his office and let him explain his malpractice on the record. I scheduled the consultation with Gregory Hughes for 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Greg served as the primary legal counsel for my in-laws. He was not a corporate trust officer. He was not a partner at a prestigious downtown litigation firm. He operated a boutique practice tucked inside a sterile stucco office park off Camelback Road. He spent his career handling mid-tier personal injury claims and defending individuals accused of driving under the influence. Over the past 5 years, his most frequent client was my brother-in-law, Jason. Whenever Jason accrued a reckless driving charge or faced a civil summons from an angry creditor, Greg was the man Barbara called to suppress the damage. I parked my sedan in the sunlit asphalt lot and turned off the ignition. A commercial bank does not hand $45,000 to an elderly woman holding a decade-old piece of paper. The teller would have flagged the transaction. The branch manager would have demanded secondary verification. Barbara required a professional accomplice to bypass those security algorithms. She needed a man wearing a tailored suit who possessed a state bar license to intimidate the financial institution into releasing the funds. I stepped out of my vehicle and walked toward the glass entrance of the office park. I wore a structured charcoal blazer and pristine slacks. My professional armor was secured. I carried my leather work tote resting against my hip. I walked into the reception area and offered my name to the administrative assistant. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and synthetic citrus air freshener. 2 minutes later, a heavy wooden door opened. Gregory Hughes stepped into the waiting room. He was a man in his late 50s, possessing a perpetual tan and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his jawline. He wore a gray suit with a subtle pinstripe pattern. He extended his right hand. "Letizia," he said, his voice projecting a rehearsed, sympathetic cadence. "Please come back to my office. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Michael was a wonderful man." I did not shake his hand. I offered a brief, rigid nod and bypassed him, stepping into his private workspace. The office featured a faux mahogany desk and framed diplomas hanging on a painted accent wall. I took a seat in the leather guest chair. I placed my tote on the floor near my ankles. Greg walked behind his desk and sat down, steepling his fingers together under his chin. He adopted the patronizing posture of a seasoned professional, preparing to explain a complicated concept to an ignorant, grieving housewife. "I know this is a disorienting period, Letizia," he began, leaning forward slightly. "Grief clouds our judgment. It makes the administrative tasks feel overwhelming. Barbara informed me that you were asking questions regarding the probate timeline. I wanted to sit down with you and clear the air." I kept my posture perfectly straight. I did not break eye contact. "I understand the probate timeline, Greg," I replied. My voice was smooth and deliberately mild. "I am simply trying to organize Michael's final expenses. The municipal fees require immediate payment. When I checked our joint banking ledger yesterday afternoon, I noticed the account was entirely empty." Greg offered a soft, condescending chuckle. He adjusted the cuffs of his striped shirt. "That is exactly why we needed to have this conversation," he explained. "Financial transitions during a sudden bereavement can be jarring. You must understand that the family is taking the reins to spare you the burden of these logistics." Barbara stepped in to handle the immediate costs of the memorial service. She utilized a standing legal directive to secure the necessary capital. A standing legal directive, I repeated, testing the structural integrity of his lie. "Yes," Greg said, his smile widening. "Michael granted his mother a broad financial power of attorney several years ago. It gave her the authority to manage his assets. Given the tragic circumstances, she invoked that authority to ensure her son received a proper farewell. You do not need to worry about the funeral invoices. The family controls the estate logistics right now. He leaned back in his chair, appearing immensely satisfied with his own explanation. We anticipate the court will grant you a small spousal allowance once the primary debts are settled, he added, tossing the concession across the desk like a scrap of meat. We will make sure you are not left empty-handed, Letizia. I listened to his words, absorbing the sheer magnitude of his malpractice. A first-year law student understands that a power of attorney expires the exact second the principal individual becomes incapacitated or dies. The authority vanishes upon the final heartbeat. Greg was looking me directly in the eyes and attempting to pass off a blatant statutory violation as a routine administrative courtesy. A standard power of attorney ceases to function post-mortem, I stated, keeping my tone inquisitive rather than accusatory. I imagine the branch manager at the commercial bank raised concerns regarding the timeline of the withdrawal. Greg waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. Bank managers are bureaucrats, he scoffed. They get tangled in their own red tape. They simply required a licensed attorney to verify the validity of the document and confirm the familial intent. I drafted a brief affidavit of validity and accompanied Barbara to the branch on Saturday morning. I assured the manager the document was sound and the transfer was executed without further friction. The confession hung in the conditioned air of the office. He admitted it out loud. He had physically accompanied my mother-in-law to the financial institution. He had utilized his state bar credentials to vouch for a defunct legal instrument. He had strong-armed a hesitant bank manager into releasing $45,000 of stolen capital. I looked at the gold watch resting on his left wrist. I looked at the tailored cut of his pinstripe suit. Men like Gregory Hughes do not commit bank fraud out of the goodness of their hearts. They do not risk their legal licenses simply to help a grieving mother pay for floral arrangements. They require a tangible financial motive. The missing $15,000 surplus from the stolen withdrawal suddenly made perfect sense. Barbara had spent $30,000 on the lavish mahogany casket and the upscale mortuary services. The remaining funds were funneled to Jason to cover his catastrophic gambling debts. But Jason could not navigate his creditors alone. He relied on his attorney to broker the settlements and keep the collection agencies out of the courtroom. Jason owed Greg money. The lawyer had spent years defending my brother-in-law against civil summons and traffic violations. Clients who treat reality like a casino rarely pay their legal retainers on time. Greg was sitting on thousands of dollars in unpaid invoice hours. When Michael died, Barbara saw a liquidity event. She formulated a plan to extract the cash, but she needed a legal key to turn the lock. Greg agreed to serve as the key under one specific, non-negotiable condition. He demanded his past due legal fees be skimmed right off the top of the stolen withdrawal. He facilitated a felony to secure his own paycheck. I understand the dynamic now, I said. My voice dropped the inquisitive pitch and adopted the rhythmic, cold cadence of a corporate trust officer. I appreciate you clarifying your exact role in the Saturday morning transaction. Greg frowned. The patronizing smile vanished from his jawline. He sensed the sudden drop in the atmospheric pressure. He realized my tone did not match the profile of a confused widow seeking comfort. Letizia, there is no need to make this difficult, he warned, his voice hardening into a defensive edge. The estate is secure. Barbara is managing the transition. You should focus on healing and let the professionals handle the ledger. I picked up my leather tote from the floor. I stood up from the guest chair. I did not yell. I did not threaten him with police intervention. Screaming at a corrupt attorney only provides them with the opportunity to draft a defense strategy. I simply smoothed the front of my blazer and looked down at him. I will let the professionals handle the ledger, Greg. I agreed. I turned around and walked out of the private office, leaving him sitting behind his faux mahogany desk. I navigated the stucco corridors and exited the building. The Arizona heat baked the asphalt parking lot. I unlocked my sedan and slid into the driver's seat. The air inside the vehicle was stifling, but my mind operated with an icy, pristine clarity. I opened my laptop, resting it against the steering wheel. I connected to the secure cellular hotspot. I did not drive away immediately. I needed to document the malpractice, while the specific phrasing of his confession remained fresh in my memory. I navigated to the official regulatory portal for the Arizona State Bar. Every licensed attorney operating within the state boundaries is bound by a strict code of professional conduct. A lawyer who knowingly facilitates the illegal extraction of funds from an incapacitated or deceased individual's account commits a profound violation of their fiduciary duty. I opened a blank digital complaint form. My fingers moved across the keyboard with rapid precision. I drafted the narrative, relying on cold statutory facts. I detailed the exact hour of my husband's death. I documented the Saturday morning wire transfer. I transcribed Greg's verbal admission that he provided an affidavit of validity to override the bank manager's security protocols. I outlined his financial conflict of interest regarding his unpaid retainer fees tied to Jason Morris. I finalized the complaint and exported it as a secure document. I did not submit it to the disciplinary board yet. Submitting the form right now would alert Greg to the impending investigation. I needed the trap to spring simultaneously on all fronts. I needed the lawyer, the mother-in-law, and the golden child to face their destruction on the exact same public stage. I printed the drafted complaint to my home office server. It would become the newest addition to the growing stack of undeniable systemic justice resting inside my black mourning envelope. Greg believed he was untouchable because he held a law degree. He failed to realize that a law degree offers zero protection against a verified paper trail. I closed the laptop and placed it back into my tote. I started the engine of my car and merged onto the sunlit avenue, heading toward my quiet neighborhood. I had secured the bank fraud report. I had isolated the forged life insurance logs. I had documented the corrupt attorney. The offensive strategy was nearly complete. I turned onto my residential street and slowed the vehicle. As my house came into view, the sense of quiet momentum evaporated. A familiar luxury sport utility vehicle was parked in my driveway. Two figures stood on my front porch. Barbara and Stephanie had arrived unannounced. My mother-in-law held a cheap foil-wrapped baking dish in her hands. The predators had sensed a shift in the wind, and they were coming to my front door to ensure the blindfold was still securely tied around my eyes. The transition from the sterile stucco corridors of Gregory Hughes' law office to the quiet sanctuary of my own home provided a stark physical contrast. I parked my sedan in the garage and stepped into the cool, regulated air of my kitchen. The Arizona sun was beginning its steep descent, casting long, jagged shadows across the desert landscaping visible through the rear windows. My forensic timeline was secure. The formal complaint against the corrupt estate attorney was drafted and saved on my local server. I had isolated the forged digital footprint on the corporate life insurance portal. I possessed the bank routing sequence, proving the theft of $45,000. The architecture of their ruin was resting safely inside my black mourning envelope. I poured myself a glass of ice water and stood near the quartz island. I required a moment of stillness to process the sheer density of the crimes my in-laws had committed in less than a week. They utilized my husband's sudden death as a lucrative liquidity event. They hired a malpractice-prone lawyer to strong-arm a bank manager. They set up a deceptive crowdfunding portal to siphon capital from affluent software developers. They were attempting to evict me from a house I had placed inside an impenetrable blind trust 90 days ago. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was interrupted by the sudden, sharp chime of the front doorbell. I set my water glass down on the stone counter. The condensation left a perfect dark ring on the surface. I walked down the short hallway and peered through the security lens embedded in the front door. A pristine white luxury sport utility vehicle sat idling in my driveway. Standing on my concrete porch were Barbara and Stephanie. Their arrival was unannounced and entirely predictable. Desperation operates on a rigid timetable. When apex predators sense a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure, they leave their dens to secure the perimeter. I had remained too calm. I had not bombarded their cell phones with hysterical demands. I had not caused a scene at the upscale mortuary. My silence was a variable they could not quantify, and unquantified variables generate profound anxiety. They were standing on my porch to administer a preemptive strike. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door inward. The residual heat of the late afternoon drifted into the foyer. My mother-in-law stood on the welcome mat, wearing a tailored charcoal blouse and pearl earrings. Her posture was rigid. She held a shallow, rectangular aluminum pan wrapped tightly in generic kitchen foil. Stephanie stood half a step behind her, hiding her eyes behind dark designer sunglasses. "Letitia's sweetheart Barbara," crooned, her voice pitched a half-octave higher than her standard register. It was the specific soothing tone she used whenever she needed to extract a favor. "We know you are going through an unimaginable ordeal. We wanted to bring you a hot meal." She extended her arms, offering the foil-covered pan. I looked at the aluminum container. The edges were crimped unevenly. A white sticker, bearing a barcode from a local chain supermarket, was still partially visible on the side. It was a pre-packaged frozen lasagna. This was their offering. My mother-in-law had engineered a $30,000 theatrical funeral to impress the neighborhood and funneled $15,000 of my stolen capital to cover her younger son's gambling debts. To compensate for this staggering financial theft, she spent $8 on a frozen pasta dish. She did not even bother to transfer the food into a proper ceramic baking dish to disguise the lack of effort. The generic foil container was the ultimate physical manifestation of their parasitic dynamic. It was a cheap, hollow gesture masquerading as genuine familial grief. I accepted the aluminum pan. The bottom was barely warm, indicating she had heated it in a microwave for a fraction of the required time. I offered a flat, polite nod. "Thank you, Barbara," I said, keeping my tone even and measured. "Please come inside." I stepped back and allowed them to cross the threshold. Stephanie removed her sunglasses, sliding them onto the top of her head. She looked around the quiet foyer with a critical, sweeping gaze, searching for any sign of emotional collapse. She found nothing but pristine hardwood floors and orderly spaces. I led them into the kitchen and set the cheap lasagna on the quartz island. Barbara and Stephanie positioned themselves on the opposite side of the counter. The physical barrier between us felt appropriate. "It is just so empty in here without him," Stephanie murmured, crossing her arms over her chest. She deployed the observation like a probe, trying to locate a vulnerable nerve. "It is quiet," I agreed. I did not offer her the satisfaction of a tearful breakdown. Barbara cleared her throat. She reached up and adjusted one of her pearl earrings. Her fingers trembled slightly against her earlobe. "We are all trying to find our footing, Letizia," she said, her voice dropping into a solemn, practiced whisper. "Michael would want us to lean on each other. He would want us to handle these terrible logistics as a unified front." I folded my hands and rested them on the edge of the cool stone counter. I waited for the pivot. "The estate transition is so incredibly taxing," Barbara continued, letting out a long, weary sigh. "The funeral arrangements, the notifications, the probate filings, it is a labyrinth. I was speaking with Greg this afternoon to ensure we are handling everything by the book." She invoked the name of her corrupt attorney to project an aura of established authority. She wanted me to believe that a man holding a state bar license endorsed her actions. Greg suggested a simple administrative step to help us bypass some of the municipal red tape, she explained. She unclasped her designer handbag and reached inside. She bypassed her wallet and pulled out a single folded sheet of standard printer paper. She smoothed the creases flat against the quartz island and slowly slid the document across the counter toward me. "It is just a routine probate waiver," she said, offering a tight, reassuring smile. "Greg said it is standard procedure for surviving spouses. It allows the executor to finalize the immediate banking transfers without dragging you into a courtroom every single week. It will speed up the process and honor Michael's memory by letting him rest in peace without a drawn-out legal fight." She retrieved a silver ballpoint pen from her purse and placed it deliberately next to the paper. I did not touch the pen. I lowered my gaze and read the text printed on the page. "I am a corporate trust officer. I dissect complex estate transfers for a living. I did not require a legal dictionary to interpret the instrument sitting in front of me." The bold typography at the top of the sheet read, "Waiver of spousal election and consent to administration." It was a legal guillotine. If a widow affixes her signature to this specific statutory form, she voluntarily surrenders her overriding right to contest the actions of the designated executor. It acts as a blanket indemnification. By signing this page, I would retroactively ratify every single financial maneuver Barbara and Greg had executed since my husband's heart stopped beating. I would legally authorize the $45,000 wire transfer. I would forfeit my right to request a forensic accounting of the joint ledger. The bank fraud would evaporate. The theft would become a sanctioned, approved expenditure. They realized the bank teller logs and the digital routing numbers were sitting in the commercial banking database, waiting to be discovered. They knew I would eventually check the account balance. They rushed to my house with a frozen lasagna to trick me into signing away my legal recourse before I realized the money was already gone. Stephanie shifted her weight, tapping her heel against the floorboards. "Just sign it, Letizia," she urged, her tone laced with poorly concealed impatience. "We have so much to organize for the reception tomorrow. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at my sister-in-law. Then I looked at the woman who had drained my bank account. If I possessed a volatile temperament, I would have picked up the silver pen and snapped it in half. I would have informed them that I possessed the IP logs proving their attempted insurance fraud. I would have told them that the Arizona house they were planning to steal was locked inside an irrevocable trust. But noise is the enemy of accuracy. Confronting a predator prematurely only provides them with the opportunity to invent a new lie. I did not yell. I managed the micro-expressions on my face with severe discipline. I looked directly into Barbara's eyes and summoned a smile. It was a tight, terrifying expression that did not reach my upper features. It was the smile of a trap locking into place. "I appreciate you bringing this over, Barbara," I said. My voice was smooth, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of warmth. I know Greg likes to keep his files organized. I picked up the document, holding it by the very edge of the paper. I did not pick up the pen. I never sign legal instruments without reviewing the clauses. Overnight, I informed her. It is a rigid professional habit. I will read through the statutory language this evening and keep it safe. Barbara's manufactured smile fractured. A flash of genuine panic registered in her eyes before she forced her expression back into a neutral mask. She reached out her fingers, hovering over the quartz counter, as if she wanted to snatch the paper back. "Letizia, it really is just standard boilerplate," she pressed, her voice tightening. "Greg needs it filed by tomorrow morning." "I am sure Greg can wait 12 hours for a signature," I replied, holding my ground with effortless posture. "I will bring it with me to the memorial reception." Stephanie let out a sharp, frustrated breath, but Barbara held up a warning hand, stopping her daughter from escalating the confrontation. Barbara recognized the immovable density of my tone. Pushing harder would only amplify suspicion. She needed to maintain the illusion of the caring mother-in-law. "Of course, sweetie," Barbara murmured, withdrawing her hand. "Take your time. We just want to make this seamless for you." I thanked them for the visit and walked them back to the front door. I stood in the foyer and watched through the security lens as they climbed into their luxury vehicle. The engine roared to life, and they reversed out of the driveway, speeding away into the desert dusk. I turned around and walked back to the kitchen island. I picked up the routine probate waiver. Then I looked at the foil-wrapped lasagna sitting next to it. They believed they had planted a seed of salvation. They did not know the soil was already salted. The trap was now perfectly primed for the memorial reception tomorrow. I folded the waiver and carried it down the hallway. It was time to place the final document into the black mourning envelope. The heavy wooden door of my Scottsdale home clicked shut. I engaged the deadbolt and turned the secondary brass lock. The metallic sequence echoed through the quiet entryway. I stood in the foyer and listened to the retreating hum of the luxury sport utility vehicle carrying my in-laws away from my property. They were driving back to Barbara's condominium, assuming they had successfully neutralized the threat to their scheme. They believed a generic frozen lasagna and a few hollow compliments had secured my compliance. I walked into the kitchen and stood before the quartz island. The overhead pendant lights cast a sharp glow across the surface. 2 items rested on the polished stone. One was the fraudulent waiver of spousal election my mother-in-law had attempted to trick me into signing. The other was the shallow rectangular aluminum pan wrapped tightly in generic kitchen foil. I picked up the legal document first. The printer paper felt thin between my fingers. This single sheet of paper represented the sheer audacity of their survival instinct. If I had yielded to the societal pressure to maintain family unity and scribbled my signature on the designated line, I would have legally adopted their crime. The state felony would have evaporated. The $45,000 theft would have become a sanctioned, approved expenditure. I gripped the top edge of the document and tore it cleanly down the middle. I stacked the 2 halves and tore them again. I dropped the shredded remnants into the recycling bin. The trap they brought into my home was dismantled. I turned my attention to the aluminum pan. I peeled back the foil edge. The scent of synthetic tomato sauce and processed cheese wafted into the air. The edges of the lasagna were burnt, while the center remained entirely frozen. This was the currency they believed my loyalty was worth. They stole my financial security to fund an elaborate theatrical funeral for the neighborhood, and they offered me an $8 grocery store meal as compensation. I picked up the pan. I stepped over to the stainless steel sink and flipped the wall switch. The garbage disposal roared to life, a harsh, grinding mechanical sound echoing off the laminate counters. I tipped the foil container forward. The frozen lasagna slid out of the packaging. It hit the drain and the steel blades grabbed the dense pasta, pulling the entire block down into the dark, rotating chamber. I let the cold water run for a full minute, washing away the sauce and the grease until the drain was completely clear. I flipped the switch off. The kitchen returned to a state of clinical silence. I dried my hands on a linen towel. I pulled one of the elevated stools away from the island and sat down. I opened my laptop and woke the screen from its dormant state. The physical confrontation was over. The performative family interaction had concluded. It was time to return to the mathematics of my survival. I logged into my secure, encrypted network and opened my case files. The architecture of their destruction required precise chronological sequencing. I opened the formal bank fraud report regarding the $45,000 unauthorized wire transfer. The commercial bank required the exact timestamp of my husband's death. I attached the municipal documentation from the trauma center, proving Michael had passed away nearly 2 hours before the transfer was initiated. I attached the scanned copy of the stale 10-year-old power of attorney document Barbara had utilized to drain the account. I clicked submit. The report vanished into the secure portal. The financial institution would receive the alert by morning. Their security algorithms would instantly flag the transaction, freezing my mother-in-law's local credit union account, pending a formal federal review. The stolen liquid capital was now locked in a legal holding pattern. I opened the drafted complaint addressed to the Arizona State Bar. Gregory Hughes had utilized his state bar license to intimidate a bank manager into releasing stolen funds. He had facilitated a felony to secure his own unpaid legal retainer fees tied to Jason. I reviewed the narrative, checking the margins and the statutory citations. I detailed the exact hour of my husband's death. I documented the Saturday morning wire transfer. I transcribed Greg's verbal admission that he provided an affidavit of validity to override the bank manager's security protocols. I clicked Submit. The disciplinary board would receive the complaint by tomorrow afternoon. The corrupt attorney was facing disbarment and a crippling malpractice suit. His legal license was no longer a shield. It was a target. I minimized the browser windows and opened the digital folder labeled Morris Family Irrevocable Trust. I printed a fresh certified copy of the primary trust document. The Arizona house, the corporate life insurance policy, and our primary investment portfolios were securely locked inside this legal fortress. Barbara could not file her dusty 12-year-old quitclaim deed. She could not evict me from my sanctuary. I printed the digital access logs detailing Barbara's attempted invasion of the life insurance portal. The IP address traced back to her residential broadband network, proving she had tried to reroute $750,000 to Jason while her son lay unconscious in an intensive care unit. Finally, I printed the Arizona Corporation Commission public registry filing exposing Jason as the sole owner of the Michael Morris Memorial Fund. The crowdfunding portal was a deceptive facade designed to funnel untaxed capital from affluent software developers directly into Jason's private commercial account. The megachurch charity claim was a lie. The donations were subsidizing his offshore gambling debts. I gathered the warm sheets of paper from the output tray. I punched 3 holes along the left margin of each page. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved the sleek black leather portfolio. The silver metal rings clicked sharply as I pulled them apart. The binder was growing heavy. I placed the trust documents, the forged insurance access logs, the bank fraud report, the state bar complaint, and the corporate registry filing inside. I snapped the rings closed, securing the flawless architecture of their impending destruction. I ran my hand across the smooth, dark leather cover. My physical shelter was safe. My long-term financial security was locked behind an impenetrable legal barrier. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. On the top shelf sat a box of decorative packaging materials I kept for wrapping holiday presents. I selected a sleek black mourning envelope. It was constructed of thick, heavy paper, usually reserved for presenting formal condolences or sensitive legal notices. It looked somber, elegant, and entirely unassuming. I carried the black envelope back to the office. I removed the compiled documents from the leather portfolio. I folded the pristine pages into exact horizontal thirds. I slid the stack of undeniable systemic justice inside the decorative sleeve. I sealed the flap, pressing my thumb along the adhesive edge to ensure a tight, permanent bond. The Trojan horse was ready. It was a devastating legal avalanche wrapped in a somber black envelope destined for a lavish memorial reception. I carried the envelope to the front entryway and placed it carefully on the console table directly next to my car keys. I hung my tailored black wool suit on the closet door, ensuring the fabric remained free of wrinkles. The preparation was complete. The investigative grind was over. Tomorrow afternoon, the stage lights would turn on, the congregation would take their seats, and the illusions would finally shatter. As I reached to turn off the entryway light, my cellular phone vibrated on the console table. A new group text message arrived. Barbara was sending the final logistical updates for the memorial service. The text detailed the exact timeline for the catering delivery and the floral arrangements. She was managing the event with the precise cadence of a corporate event planner. She still believed her stage set was perfectly intact. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet had just been fundamentally altered. I locked the phone and walked into the quiet darkness of my home. The trap was set, and I was ready to watch it spring. The Arizona sun punished the asphalt parking lot of the upscale Scottsdale mortuary. Heat radiated in visible, shimmering waves across the hoods of the imported luxury vehicles filling the designated spaces. I turned off the ignition of my sedan and sat in the quiet interior for a fraction of a minute. I did not require a moment to compose myself. I required a moment to finalize the chronological sequencing of the afternoon. I stepped out of the vehicle and smoothed the fabric of my attire. A grieving widow typically wears a garment reflecting profound sorrow. A high neckline, a flowing dark dress, a veil to shield red-rimmed eyes from the intrusive stares of sympathetic neighbors. I wore none of those items. I wore a tailored black wool suit featuring sharp, structured lapels and trousers cut with geometric precision. It was the exact uniform I utilized when walking into federal deposition hearings. It was not an outfit designed for mourning, it was corporate armor. I carried my structured leather work tote resting against my hip. Inside the primary compartment, secured away from the punishing desert heat, sat the sleek, black mourning envelope. I walked up the manicured stone pathway and pulled open the heavy brass doors of the facility. The transition from the blazing exterior to the climate-controlled interior was jarring. The air inside the lobby felt sterile and frigid, carrying the heavy, cloying scent of floor wax and imported white lilies. I navigated the carpeted hallway toward the primary viewing suite. The space was already operating at maximum capacity. Michael had spent his adult life building complex software architecture. His professional orbit consisted of affluent technology developers, venture capitalists, and senior engineering executives. These were individuals who calculated risk, evaluated data, and generated substantial personal wealth. They were accustomed to controlling their environments. Death is the singular variable they cannot code or mitigate, and it makes them profoundly uncomfortable. They stood in tight, awkward clusters near the rear of the viewing room, holding their hands clasped in front of their waists. They wore expensive dark suits and shifted their weight nervously, eager to fulfill their social obligations and retreat to the safety of their boardrooms. I bypassed the crowded entryway and walked down the center aisle. The stage set my mother-in-law had engineered using my stolen capital was immaculate. Cascading towers of white orchids flanked the front staging area. In the center, resting under the soft, recessed lighting, sat the Honduran mahogany casket, featuring its polished bronze handles and tufted silk interior. The aesthetics of the $30,000 purchase projected an aura of established generational wealth. I did not take a seat in the front row. The front row is reserved for the primary mourners, the individuals demanding the spotlight. I stepped into the second row, selecting a padded velvet chair situated near the center aisle. I sat down and placed my leather tote on the floor near my ankles. From this vantage point, I possessed an unobstructed view of the performance. Barbara occupied the center seat in the front row. She wore a dark tailored dress and a dramatic sweeping hat that partially obscured her profile. She was executing a masterful theatrical production. She did not weep silently. She produced a series of ragged, calculated sobs, timed perfectly to draw the attention of the affluent tech executives filtering past the casket. Whenever a software developer or a corporate vice president approached her to offer condolences, she would reach out and grip their hands. She would bury her face in a pristine white handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with manufactured devastation. She played the role of the shattered matriarch, extracting deep reservoirs of sympathy from men who possessed deep reservoirs of disposable income. While Barbara secured the emotional leverage, her younger son executed the financial extraction. Jason stood near the edge of the floral arrangements, functioning as the stoic, resilient pillar of the family. He wore a dark fitted suit that hid the desperate reality of his offshore gambling debts and his chaotic, unemployable lifestyle. He intercepted the wealthy colleagues as they stepped away from his weeping mother. I watched him operate, He possessed a predator's instinct for identifying vulnerable targets. A senior venture capitalist who had funded Michael's last 2 software projects approached the front of the room. The man looked visibly strained, eager to express his sorrow and escape the heavy atmosphere of the mortuary. Jason stepped directly into his path, intercepting the executive with a firm, solemn handshake. I could hear the low timbre of Jason's voice carrying over the ambient whispers of the crowd. He thanked the investor for coming. He spoke about Michael's brilliant legacy and the void left behind. Then he executed the pivot. Jason reached toward the small mahogany table situated near the viewing line. He picked up one of the heavy cardstock memorial programs. He handed the expensive paper to the venture capitalist. As the executive accepted the program, Jason subtly rotated his wrist, tapping his index finger against the back cover. I knew exactly what was printed on that page. It was the square geometric pattern of a quick response barcode. Jason leaned in close, lowering his voice into a tone of quiet, dignified purpose. He informed the wealthy investor about the Michael Morris Memorial Fund. He explained that the family was launching a charitable initiative to build an urban bicycle safety charity in his brother's honor. He suggested that scanning the code would provide a direct avenue to contribute to the legacy. The venture capitalist nodded eagerly. Affluent professionals prefer digital, frictionless transactions. Donating capital through a web portal allowed him to assuage his grief and fulfill his social duty in a matter of seconds. He pulled his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket and scanned the printed code. I watched the man tap the screen of his device, authorizing a transfer. He had no idea he was bypassing any registered tax-exempt organization. He did not know his money was filtering directly into a private limited liability company. He believed he was funding a noble charitable endeavor. He was actually subsidizing the bookies and collection agencies actively hunting the young man shaking his hand. The sheer, terrifying efficiency of their scam played out right in front of me. They were using my husband's corpse as a fundraising prop. I reached into my bag and retrieved a small bottle of mineral water. I unscrewed the cap and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid washed over my throat. I lowered the bottle and shifted my gaze back to Jason as he turned to greet the next affluent target. A sudden flash of reflected light caught my attention. As Jason reached out to embrace a software engineer, his dark suit sleeve retracted an inch up his forearm. Fastened around his wrist was a heavy, distinct piece of jewelry. The ambient light from the recessed fixtures illuminated a solid gold casing and a sophisticated chronograph dial. It featured a dark leather band showing the faint permanent creases of continuous wear. The air in my lungs went entirely still. My pulse maintained a steady rhythmic cadence, but my focus narrowed into a sharp, piercing tunnel. The watch did not belong to Jason. It was a vintage mid-century timepiece. Michael had purchased that specific watch at an antique auction in Chicago 6 years ago. He bought it to celebrate the successful launch of his first proprietary software architecture. It represented thousands of hours of coding, endless late nights, and the tangible reward of his own disciplined intellect. Michael wore that watch every single day. He only took it off when he went cycling. On the morning of the fatal accident, he had left the vintage timepiece resting on the oak dresser in our primary bedroom. While I was sitting in the sterile trauma ward, listening to a physician pronounce the time of death, someone had walked into my home. Stephanie and Barbara had requested access to the house later that same afternoon, claiming they needed to retrieve a specific dark suit for the burial preparations. I had handed them the spare key, trusting them to respect the sanctity of my space. They did not respect the space. They scavenged it. They walked into my bedroom, opened the jewelry box, and extracted the gold watch. They handed the heirloom to the golden child, ensuring he possessed the correct aesthetic accessories to play the role of the successful, resilient brother. Jason was standing 10 feet away from me, soliciting fraudulent donations from grieving executives while literally stealing time off a dead man's wrist. I did not drop my water bottle. I did not stand up from my velvet chair and march across the room to demand the immediate return of the stolen property. Confrontation in a crowded mortuary only generates noise, and noise provides liars with an opportunity to construct a defense. I kept my hands resting loosely on my lap. I looked at the gold casing gleaming against Jason's cuff. I looked at Barbara, dabbing her dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief. I felt the corners of my mouth pull upward into a faint, terrifying smile. They were performing their perfect grief. They were extracting untaxed capital and wearing stolen heirlooms. They felt invincible standing on the stage they had purchased with the $45,000 drained from my checking account. They possessed no concept of the legal avalanche currently suspended directly above their heads. They did not know the state bar complaint against their corrupt attorney was already filed. They did not know the IP access logs proving their attempted life insurance fraud were printed and secured. They did not realize the irrevocable trust rendered their dusty quitclaim deed entirely worthless. I took another slow sip of water. I watched them spend stolen money they would soon have to repay to a federal bank. The viewing hour reached its conclusion. The funeral director stepped to the front of the room, issuing soft instructions for the attendees to proceed to their vehicles. The post-funeral reception was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes at a rented hall located at a nearby country club. The location was the final destination. It was the chosen theater for their ultimate public triumph. I stood up from the padded chair. I picked up my leather work tote, feeling the reassuring weight of the black mourning envelope resting inside. I walked down the center aisle, following the flow of the wealthy crowd out into the blinding Arizona heat. The stage was set, and the audience was moving to their seats. The transition from the sterile environment of the mortuary to the opulent setting of the country club was seamless. Barbara had orchestrated the logistics with the precision of a seasoned event coordinator, ensuring the affluent attendees experienced no friction between their expressions of grief and the catered reception. The country club was a sprawling Spanish colonial structure, featuring manicured golf greens and towering palm trees. It was the exact venue my mother-in-law utilized to project the illusion of generational wealth. I drove the 20-minute route alone. I did not follow the procession of luxury vehicles trailing behind the hearse. I arrived at the club and handed my keys to the valet. The afternoon heat was brutal, but the interior of the rented banquet hall was chilled to a sharp 65 degrees. The room was expansive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 18th hole and heavy crystal chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceiling. The atmosphere inside the hall was distinct from the mortuary. The stiff, awkward tension of the viewing room had dissipated, replaced by the low hum of relaxed networking. The tech executives and venture capitalists held crystal glasses of expensive wine, leaning against the cocktail tables and discussing their quarterly projections. They had fulfilled their somber obligations at the casket. Now, they were eager to resume the business of being successful. I navigated the crowded room, avoiding the clusters of my husband's colleagues. I located a small table near the rear exit and took a seat. I placed my leather work tote on the carpet near my ankles. I kept my posture straight, my hands resting loosely on the tabletop. From this vantage point, I possessed an unobstructed view of the raised platform situated at the front of the hall. The platform held a single wooden podium, equipped with a professional microphone. Barbara was already circling the area, ensuring the catering staff maintained the flow of hors d'oeuvres and the wine glasses remained full. She wore her dark tailored dress, moving with a frantic, buoyant energy that belied her supposed grief. She was not a shattered mother mourning her eldest son. She was a producer, monitoring the final act of her theatrical triumph. Jason stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a small group of software engineers. The vintage gold watch gleamed on his wrist, catching the ambient light as he gestured. He was continuing his soft pitch for the memorial fund, ensuring the QR codes on the printed programs were actively scanned. The seamless integration of their fraud was almost admirable. They had transformed a funeral reception into a high-yield fundraising gala. Stephanie hovered near the buffet line, keeping a watchful eye on my location. She still believed the physical blockade at the mortuary doors was her primary tactical error. She assumed my quiet presence at the reception meant I had accepted my designated role as the marginalized widow. She possessed no concept of the structural, legal avalanche resting inside the black mourning envelope currently concealed within my work tote. The reception reached its natural midpoint. The initial rush for food and drinks subsided. The guests settled into comfortable conversations. Barbara recognized the shift in the room's energy. It was the optimal moment to command their attention and deliver the keynote address. She signaled to the audiovisual technician stationed near the back wall. The ambient music filtering through the overhead speakers faded to silence. The main chandeliers dimmed slightly, focusing the illumination directly onto the raised platform. Barbara stepped up to the wooden podium. She held a crystal wine glass in her right hand. She picked up a silver spoon from the lectern and tapped it gently against the rim of the glass. The sharp, metallic chime cut through the low hum of the crowd. The room fell silent. 50 affluent professionals turned their attention toward the front of the hall. Barbara adjusted the microphone, her face contorting into a mask of profound, practiced sorrow. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "This week has been the darkest period our family has ever endured. Losing Michael so suddenly, it fractures your understanding of the world. He was my firstborn. He was the anchor of this family." She paused, reaching for the pristine white handkerchief tucked into her sleeve. She dabbed at her dry eyes, drawing a collective murmur of sympathy from the audience. The performance was flawless. She understood exactly how to manipulate the optics of a tragedy. "But even in our darkest moments, we find sparks of incredible light," she continued, her tone shifting from sorrow to inspiring resilience. "I look out at this room, and I see the profound impact my son had on his community. I see his brilliant colleagues, his trusted mentors, and the friends who shaped his life." She gestured toward Jason, standing near the center aisle. The crowd shifted their gaze to the golden child. "And I see the incredible strength of my youngest son, Jason," she declared. "Jason has been an absolute pillar for me this week. He stepped up when this family needed him most, navigating the logistics and ensuring Michael's legacy is honored properly." Jason lowered his head, projecting a humble, stoic posture. The vintage gold watch was prominently displayed against his dark suit cuff. The hypocrisy of the statement echoed in my mind. Jason had stepped up by allowing his mother to funnel $15,000 of my stolen checking account funds to his bookies. He had honored his brother's legacy by looting the jewelry box on the day of the fatal accident. Barbara gripped the edges of the podium, leaning closer to the microphone. "The true testament to Michael's spirit is the overwhelming generosity we have witnessed today," she announced. "The Michael Morris Memorial Fund was established to create something beautiful out of this senseless tragedy. The response from all of you, his peers, his industry family, has been nothing short of miraculous." She was securing the bag. She was publicly validating the fraudulent crowdfunding portal, ensuring the tech executives felt a deep sense of social pride for their unverified donations. She was laundering their guilt into Jason's private limited liability company. "Because of your contributions, we are not only going to fund urban bicycle safety initiatives," Barbara proclaimed, her voice rising with triumphant certainty. "We are also taking the necessary steps to secure Michael's personal legacy. We are currently in the process of bringing his beautiful Arizona home back into the family fold, ensuring it remains a sanctuary for Jason and the rest of us, just as Michael would have wanted." The audacity of the claim was staggering. She was standing in front of 50 wealthy witnesses and publicly declaring her intent to steal my primary residence. She was utilizing the 12-year-old unrecorded quitclaim deed as a theoretical weapon, assuming the sheer social pressure of the announcement would force me to surrender the property. She believed she was planting a flag on conquered territory. The crowd erupted into polite, sustained applause. They clapped for the resilient mother, the stoic brother, and the noble charitable fund. They celebrated the seamless transition of assets back to the rightful bloodline. The applause reached its peak. Barbara smiled, a tight, victorious expression glowing under the amber stage lights. I reached down and unzipped my leather work tote. I retrieved the sleek black mourning envelope. The thick, heavy paper felt substantial in my hands. I did not drop the envelope. I did not hesitate. I pushed my chair back from the table. The metal legs glided silently across the carpet. I stood up, smoothing the lapels of my tailored black wool suit. My professional armor was secured. I walked down the center aisle of the banquet hall. The applause began to taper off as the guests noticed my movement. The focused attention of 50 affluent professionals shifted from the podium to the widow advancing toward the stage. I did not march with frantic urgency. I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of a corporate trust officer entering a hostile deposition. The room grew entirely quiet. The silence was absolute, heavy and expectant. Stephanie took a step forward from the buffet line, her eyes wide with sudden panic. She recognized the structural shift in my posture. She knew I was no longer playing the role of the compliant, marginalized relative. She opened her mouth to intercept me, but the sheer momentum of my advance froze her in place. I reached the front of the hall and stepped onto the raised platform. I did not look at the crowd. I looked directly at Barbara. The victorious smile vanished from my mother-in-law's face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving a sickly, ashen pallor behind. She gripped the edges of the wooden podium, her knuckles turning white. She recognized the black envelope in my hands. She realized I was not carrying a sentimental letter or a prepared eulogy. I was carrying documentation. I stopped 2 feet away from her. I held the envelope out, extending it over the polished wood of the lectern. "Barbara," I said, my voice low, but carrying the sharp, unmistakable edge of statutory authority. "I believe you forgot to include a few administrative details in your address to the donors." She stared at the black envelope, paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying realization that her stage set was built on a trapdoor. She did not reach out to take the paperwork. She remained anchored to the podium, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Since you are incapable of providing full transparency to this room, I will handle the disclosures myself," I stated. I did not wait for her permission. I stepped closer to the microphone, positioning myself to address the silent, captivated audience. The theater was officially closed. The forensic audit was about to begin. The banquet hall remained in a state of suspended animation. 50 affluent professionals held their breath, waiting for the punchline of a joke they did not understand. Barbara gripped the polished edges of the podium. Her knuckles turned white against the dark wood. The black mourning envelope rested in her hands like a live explosive. "What are you doing?" Barbara hissed, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper intended only for my ears. "You are ruining his tribute. Get off this stage, Letizia." I did not step back. I adjusted the microphone stand, moving the metal arm an inch closer to my mouth. I did not raise my pitch to compete with the ambient tension. I lowered my tone, forcing the audience to lean forward and listen. "I am providing the structural transparency you conveniently omitted, Barbara," I replied. My voice echoed through the high-fidelity speakers, bouncing off the heavy crystal chandeliers. I turned my attention away from my mother-in-law and addressed the silent room. The tech executives and venture capitalists watched me, their wine glasses suspended mid-air. An hour after my husband passed away in the trauma ward, a highly specific financial transaction occurred, I stated. The words landed with cold statutory precision. A stale 10-year-old power of attorney document was presented at a local credit union. That defunct paperwork was utilized to drain $45,000 from our joint checking account. A low murmur rippled through the front row of tables. Affluent individuals possess a predatory instinct for detecting financial anomalies. They recognize the term bank fraud even before I assigned the label. Barbara let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She reached out, attempting to cover the microphone with her palm. I shifted my shoulder, establishing a rigid physical barrier between us. The money used to purchase the mahogany casket and the floral arrangements you saw today was stolen, I continued. My mother-in-law bypassed the natural mourning process to execute a felony. She did not act alone. She was aided by an estate attorney whose state bar complaint is currently pending review. The color drained from Barbara's face, leaving a sickly gray pallor behind. She looked at the black envelope in her hands, realizing it contained the exact mechanics of her ruin. But liquid cash was only the initial target, I informed the crowd. While my husband lay unconscious, fighting for his life, someone logged into his corporate benefits portal. The digital access logs trace the internet protocol address directly to Barbara's residential network. She attempted to forge a digital signature and alter the primary beneficiary designation on a $750,000 life insurance policy. Stephanie was standing near the buffet line, her face a mask of profound horror. She realized the scope of her mother's crimes extended far beyond planning a secret memorial service. The attempted insurance manipulation failed. I noted my tone unyielding. The policy is secure. But greed rarely halts after a single failure. It pivots towards secondary assets. I turned slightly, bringing Barbara back into my direct line of sight. You stood on this stage 5 minutes ago and announced your intention to bring my Arizona home back into the family fold, I said. You intended to file a dusty, unrecorded quitclaim deed from 12 years ago to execute an eviction. You wanted to render a grieving widow homeless so your younger son, Jason, could enjoy subsidized housing. Barbara opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to produce a sound. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. You are fighting a war you mathematically lost 90 days ago, Barbara, I declared. I looked out at the audience, ensuring the wealthy donors understood the legal reality of the situation. 3 months ago, Michael and I executed a comprehensive estate protocol I explained. We moved the Arizona property, the life insurance policy, and our primary investment portfolios into a blind, irrevocable trust. I am the sole, untouchable trustee. The document you plan to file is a worthless historical artifact. It holds zero statutory weight against a certified trust. You cannot evict me from a fortress you cannot legally perceive. The silence in the room transformed from confusion into captive horror. They were watching a surgical dismantling of a matriarch who had spent her entire life projecting suburban perfection. I shifted my focus away from the podium. I scanned the floor, locating the man standing frozen near the center aisle. Jason was shrinking inward, his shoulders rounded. The stoic, grieving brother persona had evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the exits were sealed. I addressed the tech industry colleagues and the affluent venture capitalists who had scanned the printed codes on their funeral programs. Many of you generously contributed to the Michael Morris Memorial Fund today, I said. You were told your capital would establish a local charity honoring my husband's legacy. You were told it would fund urban bicycle safety initiatives. Several men in tailored suits nodded their expressions, shifting from grief to wary suspicion. A registered charitable organization requires a federal tax-exempt identification number, I explained. It requires transparency and a board of directors. The memorial fund you contributed to possesses none of those structural requirements. I pointed directly at Jason. If you check the Arizona Corporation Commission registry, you will find a limited liability company filed on Monday morning, I stated. The sole registered agent and owner of that private commercial entity is Jason Morris. Your donations are bypassing any charitable endeavor. They are routing directly into his personal checking account. The temperature in the banquet hall plummeted. Wealthy professionals do not tolerate financial deception. They despise being targeted as marks. Jason is drowning in underground gambling debts, I announced, stripping away the final layer of their illusion. He treats reality like a casino, and his creditors demand immediate liquid cash. My in-laws monetized my husband's corpse to build this fundraising stage. They invited you here to subsidize the chaotic lifestyle of a golden child who refuses to hold traditional employment. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. A senior software engineer sitting at a nearby table pulled his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. His thumbs moved rapidly across the screen, initiating a chargeback through his payment application. 3 other executives mirrored his actions. The fraudulent capital was evaporating in real time. Jason stood paralyzed, his face flushed a dark mottled red under the harsh overhead lighting. He opened his hands, palms facing outward, in a futile gesture of defense. I stepped down from the raised platform. The wooden stairs creaked softly under my weight. I walked down the center aisle, moving with the deliberate pacing of an auditor finalizing a ledger. The guests parted instinctively, giving me an unobstructed path to my brother-in-law. I stopped 2 feet away from him. Jason looked at me, his eyes wide and leaking tears of profound humiliation. He tried to speak, but his jaw merely trembled. I did not offer him a trace of pity. Pity is a vulnerability. "You are wearing my husband's vintage gold watch, Jason," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, localized register. The ambient light from the crystal chandeliers reflected off the solid gold casing fastened around his left wrist. Michael purchased that timepiece to celebrate his own hard work and disciplined intellect, I informed him. You scavenged it from his bedroom while his body was still resting in the trauma ward. You stole his history to accessorize your fake grief. Jason swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his stiff collar. He instinctively reached over and covered the brass dial with his right hand, attempting to hide the evidence of his theft. "Unclasp the band, Jason," I commanded. He shook his head, a faint, pathetic whimper escaping his throat.
"Letizia, please,"
he begged. "People are watching. They are watching a thief," I agreed. "Take off the watch right now, or my next conversation will be with the local police department regarding the possession of stolen property." The threat of law enforcement shattered his remaining defiance. His trembling fingers moved to the intricate leather buckle. He lacked the coordination to undo the mechanism smoothly. The strap caught against the metal pin. He fumbled with the leather, his breath hitching in his chest. The clasp finally gave way. He slipped the heavy timepiece off his wrist. He held it out toward me, his hand shaking so severely the metal casing rattled. I reached out and plucked the watch from his palm. The gold was warm from his body heat. I inspected the scratch-resistant crystal face, ensuring no damage had occurred, before sliding the piece safely into the pocket of my tailored blazer. I looked around the banquet hall. The public image of the Morris family was unequivocally dead. Barbara was gripping the podium, her head bowed, unable to face the room. Stephanie was hiding near the catering tables, weeping into a linen napkin. Jason was staring at the floor, stripped of his stolen armor and his fraudulent income. The theater was closed. The stage set was condemned. I turned my back on them and walked toward the rear exit, leaving them to face the cold arithmetic of their own choices. The banquet hall remained in a state of suspended animation. 50 affluent professionals held their breath, waiting for the punchline of a joke they did not understand. Barbara gripped the polished edges of the podium. Her knuckles turned white against the dark wood. The black mourning envelope rested in her hands like a live explosive. "What are you doing?" Barbara hissed, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper intended only for my ears. "You are ruining his tribute. Get off this stage, Letizia." I did not step back. I adjusted the microphone stand, moving the metal arm an inch closer to my mouth. I did not raise my pitch to compete with the ambient tension. I lowered my tone, forcing the audience to lean forward and listen. "I am providing the structural transparency you conveniently omitted, Barbara," I replied. My voice echoed through the high-fidelity speakers, bouncing off the heavy crystal chandeliers. I turned my attention away from my mother-in-law and addressed the silent room. The tech executives and venture capitalists watched me, their wine glasses suspended mid-air. An hour after my husband passed away in the trauma ward, a highly specific financial transaction occurred, I stated. The words landed with cold, statutory precision. A stale, 10-year-old power of attorney document was presented at a local credit union. That defunct paperwork was utilized to drain $45,000 from our joint checking account. A low murmur rippled through the front row of tables. Affluent individuals possess a predatory instinct for detecting financial anomalies. They recognize the term bank fraud even before I assigned the label. Barbara let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She reached out, attempting to cover the microphone with her palm. I shifted my shoulder, establishing a rigid physical barrier between us. The money used to purchase the mahogany casket and the floral arrangements you saw today was stolen, I continued. My mother-in-law bypassed the natural mourning process to execute a felony. She did not act alone. She was aided by an estate attorney whose state bar complaint is currently pending review. The color drained from Barbara's face, leaving a sickly gray pallor behind. She looked at the black envelope in her hands, realizing it contained the exact mechanics of her ruin. But liquid cash was only the initial target, I informed the crowd. While my husband lay unconscious, fighting for his life, someone logged into his corporate benefits portal. The digital access logs trace the internet protocol address directly to Barbara's residential network. She attempted to forge a digital signature and alter the primary beneficiary designation on a $750,000 life insurance policy. Stephanie was standing near the buffet line, her face a mask of profound horror. She realized the scope of her mother's crimes extended far beyond planning a secret memorial service. The attempted insurance manipulation failed, I noted, my tone unyielding. The policy is secure, but greed rarely halts after a single failure. It pivots towards secondary assets. I turned slightly, bringing Barbara back into my direct line of sight. "You stood on this stage 5 minutes ago and announced your intention to bring my Arizona home back into the family fold," I said. "You intended to file a dusty, unrecorded quitclaim deed from 12 years ago to execute an eviction. You wanted to render a grieving widow homeless, so your younger son Jason could enjoy subsidized housing." Barbara opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to produce a sound. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. "You are fighting a war you mathematically lost 90 days ago, Barbara," I declared. I looked out at the audience, ensuring the wealthy donors understood the legal reality of the situation. 3 months ago, Michael and I executed a comprehensive estate protocol, I explained. We moved the Arizona property, the life insurance policy, and our primary investment portfolios into a blind, irrevocable trust. I am the sole, untouchable trustee. The document you plan to file is a worthless historical artifact. It holds zero statutory weight against a certified trust. You cannot evict me from a fortress you cannot legally perceive. The silence in the room transformed from confusion into captive horror. They were watching a surgical dismantling of a matriarch who had spent her entire life projecting suburban perfection. I shifted my focus away from the podium. I scanned the floor, locating the man standing frozen near the center aisle. Jason was shrinking inward, his shoulders rounded. The stoic, grieving brother persona had evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the exits were sealed. I addressed the tech industry colleagues and the affluent venture capitalists who had scanned the printed codes on their funeral programs. "Many of you generously contributed to the Michael Morris Memorial Fund today," I said. "You were told your capital would establish a local charity honoring my husband's legacy. You were told it would fund urban bicycle safety initiatives." Several men in tailored suits nodded, their expressions shifting from grief to wary suspicion. "A registered charitable organization requires a federal tax-exempt identification number," I explained. It requires transparency and a board of directors. The memorial fund you contributed to possesses none of those structural requirements. I pointed directly at Jason. If you check the Arizona Corporation Commission registry, you will find a limited liability company filed on Monday morning, I stated. The sole registered agent and owner of that private commercial entity is Jason Morris. Your donations are bypassing any charitable endeavor. They are routing directly into his personal checking account. The temperature in the banquet hall plummeted. Wealthy professionals do not tolerate financial deception. They despise being targeted as marks. Jason is drowning in underground gambling debts, I announced, stripping away the final layer of their illusion. He treats reality like a casino, and his creditors demand immediate liquid cash. My in-laws monetized my husband's corpse to build this fundraising stage. They invited you here to subsidize the chaotic lifestyle of a golden child who refuses to hold traditional employment. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. A senior software engineer sitting at a nearby table pulled his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. His thumbs moved rapidly across the screen, initiating a chargeback through his payment application. 3 other executives mirrored his actions. The fraudulent capital was evaporating in real time. Jason stood paralyzed. His face flushed a dark, mottled red under the harsh overhead lighting. He opened his hands, palms facing outward in a futile gesture of defense. I stepped down from the raised platform. The wooden stairs creaked softly under my weight. I walked down the center aisle, moving with the deliberate pacing of an auditor finalizing a ledger. The guests parted instinctively, giving me an unobstructed path to my brother-in-law. I stopped 2 feet away from him. Jason looked at me, his eyes wide and leaking tears of profound humiliation. He tried to speak, but his jaw merely trembled. I did not offer him a trace of pity. Pity is a vulnerability. "You are wearing my husband's vintage gold watch, Jason," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, localized register. The ambient light from the crystal chandeliers reflected off the solid gold casing fastened around his left wrist. Michael purchased that timepiece to celebrate his own hard work and disciplined intellect, I informed him. You scavenged it from his bedroom while his body was still resting in the trauma ward. You stole his history to accessorize your fake grief. Jason swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his stiff collar. He instinctively reached over and covered the brass dial with his right hand, attempting to hide the evidence of his theft. "Unclasp the band, Jason," I commanded. He shook his head, a faint, pathetic whimper escaping his throat. "Letizia, please," he begged. "People are watching. They are watching a thief." I agreed. "Take off the watch right now, or my next conversation will be with the local police department regarding the possession of stolen property." The threat of law enforcement shattered his remaining defiance. His trembling fingers moved to the intricate leather buckle. He lacked the coordination to undo the mechanism smoothly. The strap caught against the metal pin. He fumbled with the leather, his breath hitching in his chest. The clasp finally gave way. He slipped the heavy timepiece off his wrist. He held it out toward me, his hand shaking so severely the metal casing rattled. I reached out and plucked the watch from his palm. The gold was warm from his body heat. I inspected the scratch-resistant crystal face, ensuring no damage had occurred, before sliding the piece safely into the pocket of my tailored blazer. I looked around the banquet hall. The public image of the Morris family was unequivocally dead. Barbara was gripping the podium, her head bowed, unable to face the room. Stephanie was hiding near the catering tables, weeping into a linen napkin. Jason was staring at the floor, stripped of his stolen armor and his fraudulent income. The theater was closed. The stage set was condemned. I turned my back on them and walked toward the rear exit, leaving them to face the cold arithmetic of their own choices. I drove away from the country club, leaving my husband's family standing in the wreckage of their own design. The desert night was cool and indifferent. The social execution I orchestrated was only the initial tremor. The shockwave radiated outward over the next 72 hours, hitting each architect of the scheme with surgical precision. It began with the affluent technology executives. Wealthy professionals detest financial deception. They despise being targeted as marks by amateurs. Before the valet attendants could even retrieve their luxury vehicles from the parking lot, the venture capitalists were tapping the screens of their smartphones. They logged into their mobile banking applications and initiated immediate chargebacks against the Michael Morris Memorial Fund. A commercial payment gateway operates on strict risk management algorithms. When dozens of high-dollar reversals strike a newly formed limited liability company within a single hour, the software responds with ruthless efficiency. The gateway flagged Jason's corporate account for suspicious activity. They instituted a hard security freeze. The capital he promised to his underground creditors became trapped behind an impenetrable digital wall. The bookies and local loan sharks did not care about frozen ledgers. They demanded liquid currency. Without the stolen donations, Jason possessed zero leverage. His chaotic lifestyle caught up to him. The influencers who attended the reception did not keep the scandal quiet. They posted vague, passive-aggressive updates on their social media channels, distancing themselves from the disgraced entrepreneur. The civil summons began arriving at his apartment by the end of the week. Because he had utilized his new corporate entity to secure the lease on his imported sports car, the auto lender issued an immediate default notice. A recovery agent arrived in the middle of the night and towed his vehicle away, leaving Jason stranded in the sprawling Phoenix suburbs without a wealthy brother to purchase a replacement. While Jason navigated the collapse of his fake charity, my mother-in-law faced a much darker horizon. On Monday morning, the fraud department at my Tier 1 commercial bank processed the formal report I submitted over the weekend. They reviewed the municipal death certificate and cross-referenced the timeline with the stale power of attorney document. The corporate security officers identified the unmitigated breach. They transmitted a clawback request to Barbara's local credit union. The receiving institution froze her personal checking ledger to prevent capital flight. The theft was no longer a private domestic dispute. It was an active federal investigation. Financial institutions maintain a strict statutory duty to report grand theft and wire manipulation to state prosecutors. Barbara received a formal letter of inquiry from the Arizona Attorney General. The correspondence outlined the severe penalties for identity theft. She faced a stark choice. She could surrender to law enforcement and face a potential prison sentence, or she could produce the $45,000 she stole and attempt to mitigate the damages. She chose self-preservation. Barbara scheduled an emergency appointment with her financial broker. She sat in his office and authorized the early liquidation of her entire retirement portfolio. Withdrawing protected pension funds before the designated maturation date triggers brutal tax penalties. The federal government extracted a heavy percentage, and the state revenue department skimmed the rest, leaving her with barely enough to satisfy the clawback order. She erased her future to pay for her crime. Extinguishing the stolen $45,000 did not erase her liabilities. The upscale mortuary required compensation for the theatrical production she commissioned. The funeral director, who had bowed so respectfully to my spousal right of disposition, ran a highly profitable enterprise. He did not extend charity to fraudsters. When the initial wire transfer was flagged and reversed, he generated a new invoice. The itemized bill detailed the Honduran mahogany casket, the imported white orchids, and the velvet viewing chairs. The total sum hovered near $30,000. He mailed the invoice directly to the individual who signed the service contract. Barbara received the heavy cardstock envelope in her mailbox. Her retirement was gone. Her checking account was locked. She possessed no liquid assets to satisfy the mortuary debt. The funeral home initiated standard collection procedures, sending the account to a relentless third-party agency. The collection notices began destroying her pristine credit profile, brick by brick. The professional accomplice who facilitated the bank heist did not escape the gravity of the fallout. The Arizona State Bar received my formal grievance on Tuesday afternoon. Regulatory boards operate with clinical efficiency when presented with documented evidence of fiduciary malpractice. They dispatched an investigator to Gregory Hughes' boutique stucco office. They demanded his client ledgers and his communication records. The investigator verified the timeline of the bank visit and cross-referenced the outstanding retainer fees owed by Jason. The conflict of interest was undeniable. To save his own employment, the branch manager at the commercial bank willingly testified against the attorney, confirming Greg utilized his bar credentials to override the security protocols. Greg's malpractice insurance carrier dropped his coverage. The disciplinary committee suspended his state license, pending a permanent disbarment hearing. The man who thought a law degree made him untouchable was stripped of his credentials. He was left vulnerable to the civil lawsuit I instructed my firm partners to draft against him. The structural collapse extended to Stephanie. My sister-in-law had spent her adult life treating her brother and her mother as revolving lines of credit. She viewed standard employment as a temporary inconvenience. When her boutique credit cards reached their limit, she relied on Barbara to issue a bailout. With Barbara's retirement liquidated and the estate locked safely inside my blind trust, the bailouts ceased. Stephanie could not afford her rent. She could not maintain her designer wardrobe. She was forced to abandon her curated lifestyle and seek an entry-level retail position just to keep her utilities functioning. Throughout this cascading sequence of disasters, my cellular phone would illuminate in the quiet darkness of my Scottsdale home. The screen displayed incoming calls from Barbara, Stephanie, and Jason. I never pressed the button to accept the connection. I allowed their frantic attempts to route directly to my voicemail inbox. I would sit at my kitchen island, drinking hot tea and listening to the audio recordings of their unspooling reality. The tone of their messages shifted drastically from indignant demands to pathetic, hollow bargaining. Barbara left long, breathless recordings, weeping into the receiver, pleading for family unity. She begged me to release a small allowance from the trust, claiming she could not afford her groceries. Stephanie sent panicked texts asking how they were supposed to survive the crushing debt without Michael's income. Jason left slurred, erratic voicemails asking for a short-term loan to keep his creditors from filing criminal charges. I listened to every single word. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I simply observed the mechanics of consequence. I did not reply to a single message. I did not write a check. I did not offer a character reference. I had spent my entire marriage watching my husband serve as the reliable shock absorber for their chronic mismanagement. I refused to inherit that role. The math of their decisions was a closed loop. They stole my financial security to protect their pride, and the resulting penalties devoured their own security. They had spent their lives jumping off financial cliffs, expecting someone else to catch them at the bottom. This time, I stepped out of the way. I removed the protective barrier and allowed the natural forces of accountability to take effect. I stood back and I watched gravity do its job. The Arizona autumn brings a distinct, crisp quality to the morning light. It streams through the tall east-facing windows of my Scottsdale home, casting long geometric shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The desert landscaping outside remains still untroubled by the early breeze. Exactly 3 weeks have passed since I walked out of the country club banquet hall, leaving my in-laws to face the affluent audience they had assembled. The silence inside my house is profound and absolute. It is not the fragile waiting silence of a hostage anticipating the next attack from a relentless enemy. It is the permanent, structural silence of a fortress that has successfully repelled a siege. I sit at my kitchen island, holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The steam rises in a slow, steady column, dissolving toward the high ceiling. I do not need to check the joint banking ledger today. I do not need to monitor the corporate life insurance portal for unauthorized access logs. The legal architecture is secure and the perimeter is clear. Resting on the cool stone counter next to my coffee mug is Michael's vintage gold watch. I set my drink down and pick up the timepiece. The solid gold casing feels heavy and substantial in my palm. The worn leather band carries the faint, permanent creases of my husband's daily routine. I trace the brass dial and watch the second hands sweep across the faded Roman numerals. Michael purchased this specific watch to celebrate a major software architecture milestone in his career. It represented thousands of hours of disciplined coding, endless late nights, and the tangible reward of his own formidable intellect. When Jason strapped this watch to his own wrist for the memorial reception, he was not honoring his older brother. He was attempting to absorb a legacy he lacked the discipline to build for himself. He wanted the aesthetic of success without enduring the friction of actual effort. I polished the scratch-resistant crystal face with my thumb. The watch belongs here, in the quiet sanctuary Michael and I built together as equal partners. It will not serve as a costume accessory for a man drowning in offshore gambling debts. Situated directly next to the timepiece is my sleek black leather portfolio. The silver metal rings are locked tight, securing the documents inside. That single binder holds the Morris family irrevocable trust. That stack of certified notarized paper functioned as an invisible, impenetrable shield during the darkest week of my life. Barbara believed she could rewrite reality by threatening to file a 12-year-old unrecorded quitclaim deed. She assumed her maternal title granted her ultimate jurisdiction over our marital assets. She relied on the societal expectation that a grieving widow would surrender her territory rather than engage in an unseemly public dispute over property lines. She failed to comprehend that I am a corporate trust officer. I do not engage in disputes. I engage in statutory process. The blind trust neutralized her eviction threat before she even articulated the words in my foyer. It insulated my physical sanctuary from her boundless greed. It protected the $750,000 corporate life insurance payout from her forged digital footprints. The dark leather cover feels cool to the touch. It is a constant, reassuring reminder that emotional manipulation holds zero currency against a recorded municipal deed. The consequences of their theatrical production unfolded exactly as the mathematics dictated. The affluent donors who attended the post-funeral reception recognized the deception immediately. They initiated rapid chargebacks through their payment applications. The commercial processing gateway flagged the Michael Morris Memorial Fund as a fraudulent enterprise and instituted a hard security freeze on Jason's newly formed limited liability company. Without the influx of stolen donations, his underground creditors resumed their aggressive collection tactics. His chaotic lifestyle collapsed inward, leaving him stranded without a financial safety net or a wealthy sibling to issue a bailout. Barbara faced a much darker and far more permanent horizon. The Tier 1 commercial bank processed my formal fraud report and initiated a ruthless clawback protocol. The financial institution traced the $45,000 wire transfer and froze her local credit union account. To avoid a state prosecution for felony wire fraud, she was forced to schedule an emergency appointment with her financial broker. She liquidated a substantial portion of her retirement portfolio, absorbing brutal early withdrawal penalties to satisfy the stolen sum. She erased her own future to pay for the $30,000 mahogany casket and the imported white orchids she commissioned to impress the neighborhood. She must now face the upscale funeral director she hired, knowing she lacks the funds to cover the lavish services she demanded. Gregory Hughes, the corrupt estate attorney who facilitated the bank heist, is currently navigating his own professional destruction. The Arizona State Bar processed my formal grievance and suspended his legal license pending a formal disbarment hearing. He is drowning in malpractice litigation, stripped of the credentials he used to intimidate the bank manager. The entire parasitic ecosystem starved the moment I removed my assets from their reach. The screen of my cellular phone illuminates on the counter. The device emits a short, soft vibration, breaking my reverie. I look down at the digital display. A new text message has arrived. The contact name reads Stephanie. My sister-in-law has spent the past 3 weeks sending sporadic, frantic messages. With Barbara's retirement funds drained and Jason facing imminent ruin, Stephanie realized the infinite family bailout system was permanently closed. She is experiencing the terrifying reality of having to fund her own curated lifestyle. The notification preview displays the first few words of her message. "Letizia, please," she writes. "Mom is struggling so much, and we just need to talk about honoring Michael's memory." It is a pathetic, transparent attempt to deploy guilt. She is weaponizing my husband's memory to pry open a locked door. She wants me to read the message, internalize her synthetic grief, and offer a financial concession to ease their self-inflicted suffering. I pick up the phone. The glass screen is cool against my palm. I do not open the message. I do not type a response explaining why her request is unacceptable. I do not engage in a debate regarding familial duty. Engaging with a manipulator only proves to them that their manipulation is still effective. I swipe my thumb across the notification bar and tap the icon labeled Delete. The message vanishes from the screen, leaving no trace of her desperate pleading. I navigate to the contact settings menu. I press the option to block the caller. A confirmation prompt appears, asking if I am sure. I tap Confirm. The digital bridge is permanently destroyed. I place the phone face down on the quartz island. I have come to realize a very simple, unyielding truth during this ordeal. Grief should never require you to subsidize someone else's greed. Society places a heavy burden on the surviving spouse, demanding perpetual grace and infinite generosity. We are conditioned to believe that maintaining family unity requires sacrificing our own security. But loyalty to the dead does not mean surrendering to the living. Michael built a sturdy, secure life. I refuse to let his relatives dismantle it to fund their illusions. The process worked perfectly. The quiet widow won by stepping out of the way and letting the loud relatives dig their own graves. I relied on cold facts and structural legalities instead of forced emotions. If you have ever been treated as an obstacle in your own life, take this as your sign to stand firm. Document the anomalies. Build your fortress. Hand the damage back to the people who created it. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and join us for the next powerful story on Vega Vengeance. The Architecture of Illusion, a reflection on parenting, loyalty, and the true cost of enabling. Behind the sun-baked avenues and the meticulously manicured facades of modern American suburbia, a quiet tragedy often plays out far away from the eyes of neighbors. It is a tragedy not born of a sudden, unpredictable disaster, but rather of systemic long-term failures in parenting and a profound lack of emotional awareness. In the story of Letizia Morris, a corporate trust officer from Arizona, we bear witness to the devastating consequences of a family dynamic built entirely on transactional affection and performative grief. This narrative is not merely a tale of a hijacked funeral or shocking financial betrayal. It is a dark mirror reflecting the catastrophic cost of rescuing one child from their own choices while weaponizing the stability of another. In traditional American culture, there is immense pressure on families to project an image of success, harmony, and visible prestige. The desire to appear perfect can easily warp into a hollow, exhausting competition if fundamental character is sacrificed for mere appearances. For Letizia's mother-in-law, Barbara, her family was never a sanctuary grounded in honesty or fairness. It was a stage set carefully constructed to hide profound internal decay. Her parenting values were deeply rooted in maintaining this illusion at all costs, raising her children not with a foundation of integrity, but by assigning them rigid, polarized roles that served her own narrative. Jason, the younger son, functioned as the family's chaotic golden child. Despite a string of chronic failures and mounting debts from offshore sports betting, he was consistently rescued by his mother. Barbara viewed his irresponsibility not as a character flaw requiring correction, but as a vulnerability that required her constant maternal protection. But true long-term guidance requires parents to allow their children to face the natural consequences of their actions, teaching them resilience and accountability. By repeatedly subsidizing Jason's chaos, Barbara denied him this fundamental growth. She crippled his emotional development, leaving him entirely unequipped for the realities of adulthood, where debts cannot be indefinitely hidden behind a curated facade. When the water rose too high for Jason, his mother did not teach him how to swim. She stole a life preserver from her eldest son's widow. Letitia's husband, Michael, was a brilliant software architect who had spent his 20s shielding his siblings from the consequences of their own fiscal irresponsibility. In many traditional family structures, for every chaotic child shielded from reality, there is a quiet, reliable sibling forced to absorb the impact and carry the unseen burdens. While the golden child is celebrated or coddled, the reliable child's competence is routinely penalized with heavier loads and dismissed boundaries. Michael's sister Stephanie treated him like a limitless revolving line of credit, viewing standard employment as a temporary inconvenience. This dynamic highlights a severe lack of fairness and emotional awareness in parenting. Parents often view the quiet, steady nature of their responsible child not as a virtue to be nurtured, but as an infinite resource to be harvested. Barbara and Stephanie assumed that because Letitia and Michael paid their own bills and established strict financial boundaries, their assets were simply waiting to be conquered. This lack of emotional awareness culminated in a breathtaking violation of trust the moment Michael's heart stopped beating. Rather than mourning the loss of her firstborn, Barbara treated his sudden, tragic death as a lucrative liquidity event. Utilizing a stale 10-year-old power of attorney document, she drained $45,000 from Michael and Letitia's joint checking account. She used $30,000 of the stolen capital to purchase a Honduran mahogany casket and imported white orchids, engineering a performative public funeral to extract sympathy from affluent tech executives. The remaining $15,000 was funneled directly to Jason to satisfy his violent gambling debts. This act reveals a chilling failure to see children and the spouses they choose as independent individuals with equal rights to respect and security. To Barbara, Letitia's grief was an obstacle, and her financial security was an expendable slush fund. The betrayal escalated to an attempted federal crime when Barbara logged into her deceased son's corporate benefits portal from her home computer, attempting to forge a digital signature and reroute a $750,000 life insurance payout directly to Jason. They forgot that true family responsibility is not about hiding mistakes. It is about guiding children through them with integrity. By prioritizing their public reputation over fundamental honesty, they poisoned the very roots of their family tree. They also fundamentally misunderstood the nature of quiet competence. Letitia understood that noise is the enemy of accuracy. When she uncovered the bank fraud and the attempted identity theft, she did not scream or demand a tearful apology. She did not accept the cheap $8 frozen lasagna her mother-in-law brought over in a pathetic attempt to gaslight her into signing away her spousal rights. Instead, she retreated into her professional element, relying on the impenetrable legal fortress of the Morris family irrevocable trust. She built a forensic timeline, relying on documentation rather than emotion, to secure systemic justice. Parents who prioritize the illusion of perfection over the arduous work of genuine character building inevitably find themselves standing on fragile ground. The climax of Letitia's story underscores the ultimate failure of parenting devoid of honesty and fairness. Barbara weaponized her public image, using a country club reception to validate her illusions. It was only fitting that her downfall occurred on that very same stage. By delivering a sleek black mourning envelope filled with evidence of fraud to her mother-in-law during the reception, Letitia forced her in-laws to face the truth in front of the audience they valued above all else. The fallout was clinical and devastating. The stolen money was reversed, the corrupt family attorney faced disbarment, and the golden child was publicly stripped of the vintage watch he had scavenged from a dead man's bedroom. Ultimately, raising children within a traditional family structure must be anchored in truth. True family responsibility means raising children equipped to navigate the world with emotional awareness, integrity, and independence. A family united by fraud is nothing more than a criminal syndicate sharing a surname, bound together by mutual liabilities rather than genuine love. The resolution of Letizia's story provides a powerful, unflinching lesson in emotional survival and boundary setting. Sitting in her sunlit home, safe behind the walls of her irrevocable trust, Letizia reflects on a profound, unyielding truth. Grief should never require you to subsidize someone else's greed, and loyalty to the dead does not mean surrendering to the living. Society often places a heavy burden on blood relations, demanding perpetual forgiveness, regardless of the transgression. But true compassion must begin with self-preservation. The quiet widow won not through malice, but by simply stepping out of the way and letting the loud relatives dig their own graves, relying on cold facts instead of forced emotions. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever been the reliable one, expected to quietly absorb the damage caused by everyone else, take this as your sign to stand firm. Hand the damage back to the people who created it. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and join us for the next powerful story on Vega Vengeance. As you reflect on Letizia's journey, look closely at the foundation of your own relationships. Are you building on solid ground, or are you desperately patching cracks in a stage set that was never meant to hold your weight? When the applause finally dies down and the theater is empty, what remains in the quiet?